Chapter 1727. As the only great sage sect on the human emperor continent, the treasures in the human emperor sect's treasury were naturally the most abundant. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, the white-haired old man's expression changed immediately. Then, he said angrily, "Xiao Chen, what are you trying to do?" Everything was fine just now, but in the blink of an eye, Xiao Chen wanted to enter the treasury of the human emperor sect. As for what Xiao Chen was going to do, everyone present could guess it even if they used their toes to think. It was impossible for Xiao Chen to go sightseeing in the treasury of the human emperor sect, right? Since the negotiation failed, Xiao Chen wanted to rob the human emperor sect. This was the thought of the great sage of the human emperor sect at this moment. All of them looked at Xiao Chen angrily. Hong Xiu and Yu Shujin were also puzzled. They didn't know about the new order from Luoli, so they naturally didn't understand Xiao Chen's intention. The human emperor sect was already hostile to the Hachibara Senkai. Now that Xiao Chen wanted to rob them of their treasures, there was no point in negotiating. Yu Shujin thought in her heart. However, in the face of the angry glares of the great sage of the human emperor sect, as well as the puzzlement of Yu Shujin and Hong Xiu, Xiao Chen didn't have the slightest intention of explaining. He looked at the white-haired old man indifferently. Xiao Chen said, "Since you all want to die, it's a waste to leave these treasures in the human emperor sect. Why don't you give them to me? This way, I can make good use of them." Xiao Chen didn't have a good impression of the human emperor sect. A pitiful person must have a detestable side. Now that the second desolate was hopeless, even Luoli and the others couldn't do anything, Xiao Chen couldn't do anything. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, the great sage of the human emperor sect were furious. One of them even roared and immediately attacked Xiao Chen. "Thief, you're courting death." However, this time, the great sage of human emperor sect wasn't so lucky. Xiao Chen didn't kill him previously, but this time, Xiao Chen didn't give him any chance. He pointed with his finger and used the Xianyuan finger sword. A blood-red sword light flashed and hit the great sage's chest hard. Blood flashed, and the great sage's heart was penetrated by Xiao Chen. The great sage was killed with a single finger. The great sage's corpse slowly fell to the ground. The surrounding imperial sect experts were slightly stunned. They clearly hadn't expected Xiao Chen to kill the great sage directly. Looking at the stunned crowd, Xiao Chen said without any change in his expression, "I let you all go before, and I have always been merciful to you. Do you really think that I won't kill you?" His voice was very calm, but the experts of human emperor sect couldn't help but break out in cold sweat when they heard it. The corner of Xiao Chen's mouth curled up slightly, and a cold smile bloomed on his face. "Have you ever seen a wild beast that never bites?" As soon as he said that, the cultivators of the Runhuang sect realized that no matter how Xiao Chen had shown mercy before, and why he had forgiven them every time, from the beginning to the end, Xiao Chen was an existence that they could never hope to reach. Moreover, he was a mighty immortal who had condensed the celestial immortal mansion. He could crush them to death at any time. However, because of Xiao Chen's mercy, the experts of human emperor sect felt that they were doomed. What kind of existence were they facing all this time? It wasn't until now that Xiao Chen suddenly killed them that they came to their senses. Their gazes involuntarily fell on Xiao Chen, but they were filled with fear. Xiao Chen didn't care about the gazes of the experts of human emperor sect. He just looked at the white-haired old man and said indifferently, "Take me to the treasury. I'm not negotiating with you anymore." He was already using a commanding tone. Indeed, Xiao Chen wasn't negotiating with human emperor sect because there was no need for that. Moreover, human emperor sect didn't have the right to bargain with Xiao Chen. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, the white-haired old man knew very well that if he spoke rudely or refused again, the entire human emperor sect would probably be destroyed. Taking a deep breath, the white-haired old man said, Please." In the face of absolute power, the white-haired old man had no right to choose at all. There were two paths before him now. One was to take Xiao Chen to human emperor sect's treasury, and the other was for Xiao Chen to slaughter the entire human emperor sect and enter the treasury himself. With no other choice, the white-haired old man could only yield. Hearing that, Xiaochen nodded slightly and said to Yu Shujin indifferently, "Go tell everyone to take away everything of value in Human Emperor sect. Don't leave anything behind." Hearing Xiaochen's words, Yu Shujin didn't understand what was wrong with Xiaochen, but she still nodded. Hearing Xiaochen's words, the expressions of the experts of Human Emperor sect changed slightly, but no one dared to say anything. Very soon, the geniuses of the seventh realm began to sweep through Human Emperor sect. Everything that caught their eye, whether it was private or belonging to Human Emperor sect, was taken away. During this time, there were naturally some disciples of Human Emperor sect who tried to resist, but the result was unsurprisingly, they were quickly suppressed. Seeing the crazy actions of the people of the seventh realm and Xiaochen's sudden change, the white-haired old man who led Xiaochen and Hongxiu to the treasury finally couldn't help but ask curiously, "May I ask why?" The white-haired old man was indeed very strange, especially Xiaochen's sudden change. His attitude was completely different from before. Xiaochen didn't have to tell the white-haired old man at all, but after thinking about it, he still told the old man the truth. "Earlier, I tolerated it again and again because I wanted to save you. Although I, Xiaochen, am not a good person, I can't bear to see the Human Emperor continent and the countless creatures in the second wilderness die like this. That's why I tolerated it again and again in the hope that you can see the true face of the will of the heavenly way. As for what happened afterwards, it was because I received a message from the Sector Lord. The second wilderness is hopeless because the will of the heavenly way acted and sped up the destruction of the second wilderness. The Sector Lord and the others can't do anything, so I don't need to waste my breath on you. As for the resources of Human Emperor sect, just like I said, the second wilderness is about to be destroyed anyway. It's a waste to leave them here, so you might as well give them to me." Xiaochen told the white-haired old man the truth. At this moment, Xiaochen didn't care whether the old man believed him or not, because the result wouldn't change. The Hachibara Senkai was unable to save the second wilderness. He didn't care whether the white-haired old man believed him or not. However, after hearing Xiaochen's words, the white-haired old man didn't act like before. Instead, he sank into silence and didn't speak for a long time, as if he was thinking about something. Chapter 4, Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1728. He silently led Xiaochen and Hongxiu all the way to the treasury of the Runhuang sect and opened the entrance of the treasury. He did not resist at all throughout the entire process. In front of Xiaochen, the entire Human Emperor sect had no ability to resist. However, after the door of the treasury opened, the white-haired elder suddenly looked at Xiaochen and asked, Will the second barren territory really be destroyed? What do you think? Can the second barren territory continue to exist without the power of the origin? Xiaochen asked. There was no need to ask this question. Without origin energy, it would have been impossible for the second wilderness to continue existing. It would have been destroyed sooner or later. However, the wills of the heavenly ways had taken action, which was why the destruction of the second wilderness had sped up. With that, Xiaochen did not give the white-haired old man a chance to speak. He directly brought Hongxiu to the Human Emperor sect's treasury. Hearing Xiaochen's words, the white-haired old man was stunned where he stood. No one knew what he was thinking. When they reached the treasury, Xiaochen suddenly stopped and said flatly without turning his head. The second wilderness has fallen into the hands of the Hachibara Senkai, so the will of the heavenly way would rather destroy the second wilderness than let the Hachibara Senkai obtain it. This is the truth. As for why the second wilderness is being destroyed so quickly, it's because the will of the heavenly way worked together to destroy the rules of the second wilderness. This made the second wilderness, which already had no origin energy, even worse. Based on the current situation, the second wilderness can only last for half a month at most. Time is of the essence. The Hachibara Senkai can't do anything now. They can only use starships to save the creatures in the second wilderness. Although this is like a drop in the bucket for the entire second wilderness, we'll save as many as we can. The Hachibara Senkai will bring these people back to the first wilderness and let them live there. I can give the Human Emperor sect 10,000 places. After saying that, Xiaochen stepped into the treasury. Hong Xiu, who was standing at the side, was also stunned. She quickly regained her senses and saw that Xiaochen had already entered the treasury. She hurriedly chased after him. After Xiaochen and Hong Xiu entered the treasury, the white-haired old man stood there with a complicated expression. He did not know what to do. Or rather, he was not sure that the will of the heavenly way would really come back to save them. This was because until now, the will of the heavenly way had not shown up in the second wilderness. Many of the powerful beings in the second wilderness had also disappeared, just like the will of the heavenly way. On the other hand, the Hachibara Senkai had stepped forward and was willing to save the second wilderness. However, now it seemed that the Hachibara Senkai had no other choice. Feeling extremely conflicted, the white-haired old man murmured softly, "Will the second wilderness really go extinct?" Not caring about the white-haired old man's thoughts, Xiaochen did not hesitate after entering the treasury of the human emperor sect. He immediately began to loot. No matter what it was, whether it was weapons, elixirs, or various spiritual fruits and spiritual herbs, Xiaochen collected everything he passed into his storage ring. In the end, Xiaochen's storage ring was full. Fortunately, Xiaochen still had other storage rings on him. There were 20 or 30 of them in total. As a result, they were barely enough to store the various resources in the treasury of the human emperor sect. The destruction of the second wilderness was imminent. Regardless of whether the cultivation resources were useful or not, they naturally had to be taken away. Otherwise, it would be a waste to leave them here. Because there was no need to pick, Xiaochen quickly put everything in the human emperor sect's treasury into his storage ring. A total of 20 to 30 storage rings were now filled to the brim. After doing all that, Xiaochen and Hong Xiu walked out of the treasury of the human emperor sect. However, the white-haired old man was no longer there. He did not stand guard at the entrance of the treasury. Xiaochen did not say anything about this. He had already said what he needed to say. Xiaochen had also given the human emperor sect 10,000 places. Although the 10,000 places were too good for the millions of disciples of the human emperor sect, at least it would leave some descendants of the human emperor sect. It would not be destroyed just like that. As for whether the white-haired old man was willing to believe him and choose 10,000 people to return to the first wilderness with the Hachibara Senkai, that was not something Xiaochen needed to consider. He had already done what he could. As for whether the other party appreciated his kindness, that was their business. If the white-haired old man still did not believe him and still believed that the heavenly way would come to save them, then Xiaochen had nothing to say. He could only wait for his death. Soon, they returned to the starry sky of the seventh realm. At this moment, many geniuses of the seventh realm were still collecting various cultivation resources in the human emperor sect. Xiaochen did not rush them. At the same time, a voice-transmitting talisman once again entered Xiaochen's mind. This time, it was not a message from Luoli, but from the Wine Taoist. He told Xiaochen that the starship of the seventh realm was already close to the human emperor continent. They were responsible for evacuating the people of the human emperor continent. They should arrive in half a day. Xiaochen did not need to worry about the evacuation of the human emperor continent. The Wine Taoist, Li Qiu, and other cultivators of the seventh realm would handle it. Xiaochen only needed to collect the cultivation resources on the human emperor continent. The Wine Taoist and the others were on their way to the human emperor continent. After receiving this news, Xiaochen stood on the deck and looked into the distance. A complicated look flashed in his eyes. In half a month, the human emperor continent and even the second wilderness would be destroyed. Most of the creatures living in the second wilderness would be disappointed in the end. After all, only a few people could be saved by the Hachibara Senkai. More people would be destroyed along with the second wilderness. Of course, warriors at the level of the great sage could cross the void and leave the second wilderness with their own strength. However, this was limited to the great sage. After all, the first wilderness was too large. It was almost impossible to fly out of the first wilderness with one's own strength without relying on a starship. Only the great sage had a chance to do it. Of course, there was also the risk of death. As for those below the level of the great sage, it was impossible for them to fly out of the second wilderness with their own strength, even if it was a quasi-sage. Moreover, there were no starships in the second wilderness that could travel between the wastelands. Although they were both starships, the starships of the Hachiburas Senkai were much more advanced than the ones in the second wilderness. Only then could they travel between the wastelands. It was almost a dead end. Just as Xiaochen was feeling sorry for the imminent destruction of the second wilderness, the white-haired elder suddenly appeared in front of the starship. He bowed to Xiaochen and said, "Heir, I have something to say to you." Chapter 5. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1729. The white-haired elder from the human emperor sect had suddenly appeared before Xiaochen. Hearing that the elder had something to say to him, Xiaochen said flatly, "Speak." Xiaochen didn't hate the human emperor sect. It was the strong cultivators from the human emperor sect who had been rude to him, but so what? They were already a group of people who were about to die, so why bother with them over these things? It was indeed ironic that they would die at the hands of the will of the heavenly way, whom they had been loyal to all their lives. Looking at Xiaochen's indifferent expression, the white-haired elder sighed softly and said, "May I ask, heir, if I choose 10,000 disciples, where should I go to find you?" When Xiaochen had said that he could give the human emperor sect 10,000 spots, the white-haired elder had been very conflicted. However, after thinking for a while, he finally chose to believe Xiaochen. At this point, the white-haired elder couldn't think of any reason why Xiaochen would lie to him. There was no need to sow discord. After all, the human emperor's sect's treasures had been taken away by Xiaochen and the others. Xiaochen and the others could just leave. Why did they have to say those words to him and give the human emperor's sect 10,000 spots? Hearing this, Xiaochen looked at the white-haired elder indifferently and said, "The seventh realm will send someone else to take care of the evacuation. They'll arrive in half a day. Take this token and just say that I gave you a spot." With that, Xiaochen casually threw a token to the white-haired elder. This token was the token of Xiaochen as the heir of the seventh realm. As long as they saw this token, the strong cultivators of the seventh realm wouldn't make things difficult for the white-haired elder. Carefully taking the token, the white-haired elder said respectfully to Xiaochen, "No matter what, I still want to thank you for your kindness." Regardless of whether Xiaochen was telling the truth or not, the white-haired old man was truly grateful from the bottom of his heart. Xiaochen did not mind the white-haired old man's thanks. He waved his hand and indicated for him to leave. After which, the white-haired old man bid him farewell and left. Without much resistance, all the cultivation resources in the human emperor sect were soon plundered by the geniuses of the seventh realm. After that, Xiaochen left with his people and went to other places on the human emperor continent. Time was of the essence, so Xiaochen and the others chose to split up and go to various sects in the human emperor continent to collect their cultivation resources. What Xiaochen and the others did was indeed a little rough. In the eyes of the major sects of the human emperor continent, they were no different from robbers. However, the strong preyed on the weak in this world. Moreover, under such circumstances, it was even more so. It was impossible for the Hachiburas Senkai to get nothing in the end after working so hard to conquer the second wilderness. They could not even protect their own lives, let alone cultivation resources. Therefore, wherever Xiaochen and the others went, all the forces on the human emperor continent were plundered. In the face of Xiaochen and the others, these forces naturally would not take the initiative to hand over their cultivation resources. However, in the face of absolute strength, they had no choice. After a round of beating, it became obedient and obediently handed over all the cultivation resources. After a few days, the Wine Taoist and the others had already arrived on the human emperor continent. Dozens of starships were parked on a grassland in the center of the human emperor continent called the human emperor plain. Moreover, the news had already been spread out. Unfortunately, the Wine Taoist and the others were helpless. After a few days, there were only a few cultivators from the human emperor continent who came here. Obviously, they did not believe the words of the Wine Taoist and the others. The second wilderness was going to be destroyed. In the eyes of the cultivators of the human emperor continent, this was just an alarmist talk. It was a trick of the Hachibara Senkai. They did not trust the wine Taoist and the others at all. They felt that the wine Taoist and the others were talking nonsense and plotting something. In this regard, the wine Taoist and the others were incomparably depressed. After a few days, only the white-haired old man of the human emperor sect came once. He told the wine Taoist that Shaochen had given the human emperor sect 10,000 places. Now that the people had been selected, they would arrive at the human emperor plane in a few days. At that time, he hoped that the wine Taoist and the others could take care of them. The white-haired old man of the human emperor sect was very humble. He had no choice. After all, the wine Taoist was an almighty immortal venerable who could break through to the immortal emperor realm at any time. No one believed in him. This time, the wine Taoist, Li Qiu and several other experts of the seventh world gathered together. Li Qiu looked at the crowd and said, "It's been 5 days. What do you think of the current situation?" "Humph. A bunch of fools. In my opinion, since they want to die, let them be." Upon hearing this, one of the experts of the seventh world shouted coldly. Originally, the 100 starships of the seventh world could save about 500 to 600,000 people. But now, only 10,000 people of the human emperor sect had arrived at the human emperor plane after 5 days. They were here to save people, but they made it seem like the experts of the seventh world were begging them to leave. Naturally, they were displeased. Hearing this, the others looked unfriendly. In the end, the wine Taoist said, "Now, the other forces of the human emperor continent don't believe in us at all. There's not much time left. We can't persuade them one by one. Why don't we give all the places to the human emperor sect? Since the other forces didn't believe in the seventh world, they might as well give all the places to the human emperor sect. After all, the human emperor sect had hundreds of disciples." Hearing this, the rest of the experts of the seventh world nodded in agreement. "All right, I think the old drunkard's idea is good. Since they want to die, let them be. We'll just save those who want to live." They had the ability to save people, but now they were being ignored. Who wouldn't be angry? Li Qiu, who was sitting on the main seat, pondered for a moment. Then, he nodded slightly and said, "All right, let's tell the human emperor sect the news and see what they have to say." If the seventh world gave all the places to the human emperor sect, it meant that the people of the other forces on the human emperor continent had no chance to survive. On the second day after Li Qiu and the others told the human emperor sect the news, a great change took place on the human emperor continent. There was no night or day in the human emperor continent. On this day, a loud noise came from the sky. Immediately, the black sky was torn apart as if it was being torn apart. Countless spatial cracks filled the sky. At the same time, from those cracks, lightning constantly crisscrossed. The scene was as if doomsday had arrived. Chapter 6, Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1730. The sudden change made all the cultivators in the human emperor continent involuntarily raise their heads to look at the sky. Everyone's face was filled with shock. The scene in front of them was just too shocking. Even the old monsters who had lived for countless years had never seen such a scene before. Cracks that looked like spider webs filled the entire sky densely. Within the cracks, countless lightning bolts crisscrossed, as if they would burst out from the cracks at any time and destroy the entire human emperor continent. It was really the end of the world. Of course, such a scene didn't only happen in the human emperor continent, but also in the entire second desolate land. In the human emperor plane, Wine Daoist and Li Qiu stood side by side, looking at the countless cracks in the sky and the lightning bolts in the cracks. Even though Li Qiu was already an immortal emperor, his heart couldn't help but tremble in the face of such a large number of lightning bolts. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that any of the lightning bolts in the mountain peaks had already exceeded the heavenly punishment that would only appear when one broke through to the great saint realm. Moreover, the number of lightning bolts seemed endless. With a solemn expression, Li Qiu said faintly, "It seems like it's faster than expected." Old drunkard, is there any news from the human emperor sect? The various sector lords had estimated that the destruction of the second desolate land would take around half a month. But now, it seemed like the time had been pushed forward again. In less than half a month, the second desolate land would be completely destroyed. Facing Li Qiu's question, Wine Daoist replied with a solemn expression. We've already sent the news over yesterday, but we haven't received a reply yet. Go and urge them. There's no time left, said Li Qiu in a deep voice. We have to speed up. As soon as Li Qiu's voice faded, a voice transmission talisman streaked across the sky and entered the space between Li Qiu's eyebrows. The voice transmission talisman was sent by Luo Li. It was a simple order. They had to evacuate from the second desolate land within 3 days, regardless of the situation at that time. Only 3 days were given to Li Qiu. Obviously, Luo Li and the others had also discovered the changes in the second desolate land. Time was running out. Not only Li Qiu, Xiaochen had also received the order from Luo Li. In the past few days, Xiaochen had been collecting all kinds of cultivation resources in the human emperor continent. However, the order given by Luo Li to Xiaochen was the same as Li Qiu's. They had to evacuate the second desolate land within 3 days. Even if there were uncollected resources, they wouldn't. In the last 3 days, the time had shortened a lot. In the main hall of the human emperor sect, the white-haired old man and a group of great sage and emperors of the human emperor sect gathered together and looked at everyone. The white-haired old man said in a deep voice. What? The white-haired old man spoke bluntly without beating around the bush. If this had happened a few days ago, everyone would have refused without hesitation. But now, looking at the sky, they had no idea what to do. The great changes in the sky told everyone that the second desolate land and the human emperor continent had come to an end. Facing the lightning in the cracks, everyone present trembled with fear. Moreover, things had developed to this point. The will of the heavenly way still hadn't appeared in the second desolate land. In fact, everyone was already leaning towards the Hachibara Senkai. They gradually began to believe that the great changes in the second desolate land were indeed caused by the will of the heavenly way because he had every reason and motive to do so. If they lost the second desolate land and allowed it to be occupied by the Hachibara Senkai, it wouldn't be impossible for the will of the heavenly way to destroy the second desolate land. On the other hand, the Hachibara Senkai had no reason to destroy the second desolate land. Moreover, if it was really caused by the Hachibara Senkai, why would the Hachibara Senkai help them? They could have just watched from the sidelines. From the beginning to the end, it was the experts of the Hachibara Senkai who helped. However, the will of the heavenly way and the experts of the second desolate land were nowhere to be seen. The great sage and emperors of the human emperor sect began to realize that they had really been abandoned by the second desolate heavenly way's will. However, it was indeed a little too late to realize it now. At least the seventh realm had given the human emperor sect 600,000 places. As long as these 600,000 people could safely escape this disaster, the human emperor sect's foundation would still be there. Unfortunately, compared to the human emperor sect, the other sects on the human emperor continent no longer had the slightest chance because all the quotas had been given to the human emperor sect by the seventh realm. At this time, it was impossible for them to withdraw even if they wanted to. The hall fell into silence. After a while, one of the great sage said, 600,000 places are not enough. We have millions of disciples in the human emperor sect. There's no other way. This is already the limit. All the starships of the seventh realm can only ensure that 600,000 people leave. This is the limit, said the white-haired old man. Sometimes, people were too greedy. They wanted more after getting a little. After hearing the white-haired old man's words, everyone present realized that at least half of the disciples of the human emperor sect would be abandoned. But what could they do? 600,000 people was already the limit. Any more and no one would be able to leave. In fact, everyone present had already made a decision. They had all begun to believe the Hachibara Senkai's words. They just wanted more places. Unfortunately, there were none left. Just as everyone was discussing, a voice transmission talisman entered the white-haired old man's glabella. It was a message from the Wine Taoist. He wanted to know the decision of the human emperor sect. He wanted to know if they wanted the 600,000 people. The message also told the white-haired old man that there were only 3 days left. After 3 days, no matter what happened to the human emperor sect, the seventh realm would have to leave the second desolate land. There were only 3 days left. After receiving the message, the white-haired old man was stunned for a moment. He then looked at everyone and said, "The Wine Taoist has come. The destruction of the second desolate land has accelerated. There are only 3 days left. After 3 days, no matter what, they will leave immediately. Now, they want us to give them an answer." As soon as the white-haired old man spoke, one of the great saint emperors stood up and said, "Then what are you hesitating for? Agree. As for the selection of candidates, there are still 3 days. We can still discuss it, but we must get the quota. We can't let other forces take it away. Who would want to die if they could live?" Hearing this, the others also agreed. Since the seventh realm had given the 600,000 places to the human emperor sect, it was impossible for them to give them up. Chapter 7, Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1731. Upon hearing their words, the white-haired old man nodded and said, "All right, then I'll revert to Senior Wine Taoist." As he spoke, the white-haired old man took out a voice transmission talisman and sent a reply to Wine Taoist. Soon, Wine Taoist replied and told the white-haired old man that he would lead the disciples of the human emperor sect to the human emperor plains within 3 days. After the decision was made, it was time to select the quota. After all, there were more than 1 million people in the human emperor sect. Of course, this number included the servants, registered disciples, and so on. In fact, it was very simple to determine the quota. After deducting the servants and registered disciples, the official disciples of the human emperor sect, as well as the elite disciples, deacons, elders, and so on, there were exactly 600,000 people. Therefore, the great saint emperors in the main hall soon decided to abandon the handymen and nominal disciples. They would only lead the official disciples and those who were above them away. At first glance, this decision seemed very cruel, but in fact, it was not. After all, in a sect, the survival of the fittest was inevitable. Not to mention a sect, it was the same in this world. The fittest would live and the fittest would die. In the face of life and death, the great sage of the human emperor sect chose the official disciples to abandon the servants and registered disciples. This was understandable. As for the reason, it was very simple. It was because the official disciples were more talented and stronger. It was that simple. Soon, they made their choice. Upon seeing this, the white-haired old man immediately said in a deep voice, "In that case, go and prepare. Tomorrow morning, we will depart for the human emperor plains." Time was of the essence and there was no room for delay. The human emperor sect had taken up all the quota of the seventh realm. However, the other sects on the human emperor continent did not care at all. It could even be said that they still thought that the second wilderness will of the heavenly way would come to save them. It was simply a daydream. Waiting for the second wilderness will of the heavenly way to save them. It was no longer a matter of whether it was a miracle or not. Would you hope that a murderer would come to save you? It was ridiculous. They thought that everything could still be saved and that the will of the heavenly way would return. When that time came, the second wilderness would return to peace. As for the human emperor sect, weren't they very close to the seventh realm? Well, when the will of the heavenly way returned, let's see how the human emperor sect would explain themselves to the will of the heavenly way. These people were still laughing at the human emperor sect as if they could already see the will of the heavenly way's return and the human emperor sect being punished by the will of the heavenly way. They did not realize that they were of the human emperor sect, the quota of the human emperor of the heavenly way. In other words, they had personally handed over the quota that originally belonged to them to the human emperor sect. This was because they did not believe in the Hachibara Senkai at all. Therefore, from the beginning to the end, they had ignored the Hachibara Senkai's words. In the beginning, the human emperor's sect only had 10,000 quotas. Originally, the Wine Taoist and the others had planned to allocate some quotas to every sect and family on the human emperor continent. This way, even if they could not save all of them, they could at least leave behind some incense and inheritance. Unfortunately, these people thought they were clever and didn't take the Wine Taoist and the others seriously at all. They had no intention of taking the spot at all. It was even to the extent that the Wine Taoist and the others had sent people to invite them to the Mortal Emperor Plains, but not a single one of them had come. They were so ignorant that they had completely given up their last chance of survival. Even now, they were still waiting to see the human emperor's sect make a fool of themselves. Compared to the ignorance of these people, the human emperor's sect was different. In just one night, they had already completed the preparations for the evacuation. In fact, there was nothing much to prepare because all the cultivation resources of the human emperor's sect had been taken away by Xiaochen. At this moment, the disciples of the human emperor's sect could be said to have nothing to do. They could leave for the human emperor plains with just a flick of their shoulders. There was nothing to prepare at all. As for the quota, the human emperor's sect did not reveal anything to the outside world. What a joke! There were only so many quotas to begin with. The human emperor's sect did not even have enough for themselves. Why would they tell the other forces? Did they want them to snatch the quota from them? Not a single word was leaked. Therefore, early the next morning, hundreds of thousands of disciples of the human emperor's sect rushed to the human emperor plains. Of course, the servants and unnamed disciples were mercilessly abandoned. The official disciples and a flash of people were all led by the great sage of the human emperor's sect to the human emperor plains. At the same time, only one night had passed and the crack in the sky had become even bigger. Even the lightning in the crack looked as if it could strike down at any time and destroy the human emperor continent. The situation did not improve at all. On the contrary, it was getting worse. As a result, the people of the human emperor's sect did not dare to hesitate any longer. They only wanted to get to the human emperor plains as soon as possible. While the human emperor's sect was rushing to the human emperor plains, another day had passed. Chapter 1732. Almost in an instant, a city with a population of over 1 million disappeared. Seeing such a scene, everyone was naturally stunned. While they were still in a daze, a strange glint flashed in their eyes when they heard the man's words. The second wilderness of the human emperor continent was probably going to perish. The Hachibara Senkai wasn't lying. Everyone felt a chill run down their spines. But soon, someone else spoke up. In that case, the 8 Desolation Immortal World said they could give us some spots to safely evacuate the human emperor continent. After witnessing a city being razed to the ground in an instant, these people were reminded of the quota. As soon as the man spoke, the rest of the people present disappeared on the spot without hesitation, returning to their respective sections. Quota. We must get a quota. This was the thought in everyone's mind. The disappearance of this small city was, in fact, just the beginning. However, the news quickly spread across the human emperor continent. At the same time, after the first bolt of lightning, more and more bolts of lightning shot towards the mortal emperor continent without any pattern. These bolts of lightning were more likely to hit cities. Many of them hit uninhabited mountain ranges. However, there was one thing that was without a doubt. No matter where the lightning struck, the place that was struck would definitely be obliterated. The power of these lightning bolts was too great. It was so great that everyone was terrified and shocked. Another day passed. The frequency of lightning strikes increased. In the beginning, there was only one lightning bolt every 4 to 6 hours. Now, there would be 2 to 3 lightning bolts every 2 to 3 hours. Moreover, the number of lightning bolts that fell at one time had also increased. In the beginning, there was only one lightning bolt every time. Now, there were 2 to 3 lightning bolts falling at one time. This change made everyone on the human emperor continent panic. In just one day, the human emperor continent was almost riddled with holes. Wherever the lightning struck, there would be deep pits. It was as though the human emperor continent was going to be destroyed. If this continued, the human emperor continent would be destroyed in a month at most. Everyone was shocked. However, they were still wrong about one thing. The destruction of the human emperor continent didn't need a long time. No matter what, everyone finally remembered the quota given to them by the Hachibara Senkai. Everyone wanted to go to the human emperor plains. While countless people were rushing to the human emperor plains, the great sage of the human emperor sect had already arrived with 600,000 disciples of the human emperor sect. Under the command of the seventh realm, 600,000 disciples boarded the seventh realm starship in an orderly manner. Everything proceeded in an orderly manner. Standing proudly in the sky, Li Qiu and Wine Daoist watched the human emperor sect disciples being arranged to board the starship. Li Qiu said faintly, "We should be able to depart today." The quota was full and the situation in the second wilderness was getting more and more dangerous. Therefore, Li Qiu decided to leave today. Wine Daoist did not object to Li Qiu's words. Although 600,000 people were like a drop in the ocean compared to the entire human emperor continent, so what? The Hachibara Senkai had indeed experienced it. The living beings of the first wilderness are just like that. Don't kill them so deeply. Wine Daoist sighed and took a sip of wine. Hearing this, Li Qiu unceremoniously snatched the wine pot from Wine Daoist's hand. As if to vent his anger, he took a big gulp and said coldly, "That's why the heavens treat all things like straw dogs." After saying that, Li Qiu casually threw the wine pot to Wine Daoist. Ever since he joined the seventh realm, Wine Daoist had been carrying a wine pot with him. However, compared to before, the wine pot on his back was gone. He should be in the seventh wilderness now. Li Qiu and Wine Daoist felt sorry for the second wilderness, but there was nothing they could do. Just as the two of them were conversing, a clamor suddenly rang out from the ground below. Everyone raised their heads to look at the sky with a terrified expression on their faces. Under everyone's gaze, a bolt of lightning came crashing down from the sky, heading straight for the human emperor plains. Seeing the lightning strike, the disciples of the human emperor sect screamed in horror. "It's over! It's over! Hurry up and run!" Some people fell to the ground in fear, while others fled in all directions. But soon, the immortals of the seventh realm unleashed their auras to suppress the panicking crowd. What's there to panic about? That's heavenly punishment. Not even the great sage could stop it. Many disciples of the human emperor sect cried out in despair. Upon hearing this, several immortal realm experts from the seventh realm replied coldly, "Only Elder Li Qiu and Senior Wine Daoist from the seventh realm can deal with them. Your current mission is to board the starship as soon as possible. Hurry, continue. Don't stop." There was no need for them to worry about the lightning. Only Li Qiu and Wine Daoist could deal with it. As the immortal realm experts from the seventh realm spoke, the Wine Daoist and Li Qiu looked at the bolt of lightning that descended from the sky. Without saying anything, Wine Daoist took a step forward and said softly, "Let me do it." A single bolt of lightning was nothing to an almighty expert like Wine Daoist. Of course, if there were too many of them, even Li Qiu wouldn't be able to stop them, let alone Wine Daoist. Wine Daoist looked indifferently at the bolt of lightning in the sky, and a towering aura slowly spread out from his body. This aura was far stronger than the great sage. In front of this aura, the great sage was as insignificant as an ant. Wine Daoist's cultivation had reached the limit of the complete immortal venerable realm, and he was only half a step away from the immortal emperor realm. Wine Daoist looked at the mountain peak in the sky and slowly stretched out his right palm. It seemed casual, but soon, a terrifying pressure fell from the sky. Then, the disciples of the human emperor sect saw that the space around the mountain peak seemed to have solidified. Moreover, the power of law and spiritual energy constantly gathered together, forming a spiritual energy vortex that devoured the bolt of lightning in an instant. Universe of Myriad Tao. Wine Daoist gently clenched his right palm, and the vortex formed by the power of law and spiritual energy spun rapidly. As for the bolt of lightning, it was firmly sealed in the vortex. As the vortex spun, the bolt of lightning was quickly torn apart by the universe of myriad Tao. Chapter 9, Seeking Collection, Seeking Monthly Votes, Seeking Recommendations. Chapter 1733. The whirlpool of spiritual energy enveloped the lightning. Soon, the lightning was extinguished by Wine Taoist. A bolt of lightning that could instantly destroy a city and obliterate millions of lives had been forcefully obliterated by the Wine Taoist just like that. Moreover, it had only been a few dozen breaths since the Wine Taoist had attacked. That's it? Looking at Wine Taoist, who was standing proudly in the sky, the disciples of Human Emperor sect below were dumbfounded. In fact, they couldn't be blamed. Not to mention the disciples, even the deacons, elders, and the great sage of Human Emperor sect were stunned. It couldn't be helped. With the strength of Human Emperor sect, they had no chance to come into contact with existences at Wine Taoist's level. Even the white-haired old man had only come into contact with Immortal Realm experts. As for Immortal Venerables, he had only seen one of them. Moreover, he had only seen one of them. He hadn't even had a chance to speak to that person. Moreover, although the Immortal Venerable that the white-haired old man had seen was also an Immortal Venerable, he couldn't be compared to Wine Taoist at all. That person's cultivation base was only at the beginning of the Immortal Venerable realm, while Wine Taoist was already at the Great Perfection Immortal Venerable realm. He was only half a step away from stepping into the Immortal Emperor realm. Wine Taoist didn't feel the slightest bit happy after defeating the lightning with ease. On the contrary, he frowned slightly and looked at the crack in the sky. We have to hurry up. We have to evacuate today. Along with Wine Taoist's words, the Immortal Realm experts of the 7th realm came back to their senses and shouted, "Quick, get on the starship." They had to evacuate today. Otherwise, the lightning attacks would be more frequent tomorrow. Moreover, no one knew if there would be other changes tomorrow. Following the instructions of the experts of the 7th realm, the disciples of Human Emperor sect once again walked towards the starship. However, this time, they were extremely obedient. What a joke! None of the disciples of Human Emperor sect had seen Wine Taoist's attack. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they wouldn't have believed that there was such a terrifying existence in this world. As they boarded the starship one after another, many disciples were discussing in low voices. Too strong. Did you see how that senior attacked just now? He's simply too strong. Of course. I heard from the elders that the senior seems to be an Immortal Venerable. Immortal Sovereign Realm? You don't know about this? Above the Great Saint Realm is the Immortal Realm, and above the Immortal Realm is the Immortal Venerable Realm. That senior is already at the Immortal Venerable Realm. Moreover, the elder said that the senior is invincible even in the Immortal Venerable Realm. I'm afraid his cultivation base has already reached the Great Perfection Immortal Venerable Realm. Numerous disciples were discussing Wine Taoist. It was obvious that they were filled with awe and curiosity towards Wine Taoist because this was the first time they had come into contact with an Immortal Venerable expert. While the disciples of the Imperial sect were boarding the 7th World starship in an orderly manner, the cultivators of the other forces on the Runhuang continent also arrived one after another. However, when they arrived at the Human Emperor plane and saw the disciples of the Human Emperor sect boarding the starship in an orderly manner, their expressions changed drastically. They knew that things weren't going well, but there was nothing they could do about the current situation. They could only brace themselves, approach an Immortal Realm expert of the 7th world, and speak respectfully. Senior, we are the sect masters of the various major sects of the Human Emperor sect. Do you remember the quota that you mentioned earlier? Now that they remembered to ask for the quota, they didn't even care about it before. Upon hearing their words, the Immortal Realm expert said snappily, "There's nothing left. You all didn't want the quota that we gave you earlier, so we have given it to the Human Emperor sect. There's nothing left?" Upon hearing this, the sect masters of the various major sects were stunned. There were hundreds of thousands of quota, and all of them were given to the Human Emperor sect? For a moment, everyone looked at the disciple of the Human Emperor sect and cursed inwardly. Damn it. Who would have thought that the quota that they gave up would be given to the human emperor sect in the end? However, in order to survive, they quickly looked at the immortal realm expert of the seventh world and pleaded with a pleading look. Senior, we were the ones who deserved to die. We were foolish. We know that we were wrong. Please give us a chance. However, it was too late for regrets. Just as the sect masters of the various sects arrived, Li Qiu and the Wine Taoist, who were in the sky, had already seen this scene. Li Qiu revealed a disdainful smile as he spoke. Everyone will reveal their true self in the face of death. But it's too late to regret it now. Let the mortal emperor sect talk to them themselves. In any case, all the spots are in the mortal emperor sect's hands now. If the mortal emperor sect is willing to give up some of them, then it has nothing to do with us. Taoist Wine spoke indifferently when he heard Li Qiu. He did not intend to interfere in this matter. Just as Wine Taoist said, there were only so many quotas. Previously, these people did not care about the Hachibara Senkai's words and did not want the quota. Now that all the quotas were given to the human emperor sect, they regretted it. Therefore, they directly let the human emperor sect talk to them. If the human emperor sect was willing to give up some of the quotas, Li Qiu and Wine Taoist would not say anything. In their opinion, it did not matter who it was as long as it was someone from the second wilderness. Li Qiu nodded slightly after hearing Wine Taoist's words. He then called the white-haired old man from the human emperor sect and said to him, Chen Bai, the quota is now given to the human emperor sect. You can talk to them yourself. The white-haired old man's name was Chen Bai. When he heard this, he naturally understood what Li Qiu meant. To put it bluntly, Li Qiu and Wine Taoist were not willing to interfere in these small matters. They found it troublesome, so they simply left it to the people of the human emperor continent to solve. Chen Bai nodded respectfully after hearing Li Qiu's words. Yes. Chen Bai did not dare to do anything in front of Li Qiu and Wine Taoist. He nodded in response and then waved Li Qiu away. Only then did Chen Bai leave. He walked to the front of the sect leaders. When they saw Chen Bai, the sect leaders were stunned. However, they immediately cupped their hands and bowed. Elder Chen. Chen Bai could be considered the most senior person in the human emperor continent. He had a high prestige. Therefore, no matter who it was, they would be very respectful to Chen Bai. However, judging from the current situation, in the face of death, it was unknown how much Chen Bai's seniority and prestige could do. After all, in the face of death, who would care so much? Chapter 10, Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1734. In the face of death, Chen Bai's prestige and qualifications were not worth mentioning at all. Of course, Chen Bai was known for being a person of virtue and prestige in the mortal emperor continent. He was fair and just in doing things. However, it was obviously impossible for him to give up the quota that he had already taken. Therefore, after facing the respectful greetings from the crowd, Chen Bai only nodded slightly, and then said indifferently, Everyone, why have you all come here together? Actually, everyone was well aware of the purpose of everyone's visit. Chen Bai had also purposely asked this question. Hearing this, the various sect leaders present exchanged glances with each other, before opening their mouths to speak. Elder Chen, the human emperor continent is now in imminent danger. The quota for the Hachibara Senkai, we want, I see. But I'm sorry, everyone is a little late. Now, the quota for our disciples has already been used up. Chen Bai interrupted before the person could finish his sentence. There was naturally no need to hide the current situation, so Chen Bai directly rejected everyone present. Hearing this, the sect leaders' faces instantly turned cold. That's right, they were all in the quasi-saint realm, and their cultivation was far inferior to Chen Bai's. If it were any other time, they would definitely not dare to offend Chen Bai. But now, it was different. In the face of death, how could they care about other things? The quota for the Hachibara Senkai was already their last chance to survive, so no matter how much they had to take some. Their faces sank, and then one of them took the lead to speak to Chen Bai. His tone was no longer as respectful as before. Elder Chen, hundreds of thousands of quotas have been taken up by the human emperor sect. I'm afraid it's not appropriate to not give any chance to the other sects, right? His tone had become incomparably cold. Hearing this, the others also chimed in. That's right, the human emperor sect is eating the meat. Don't tell me you won't even leave us some soup? Elder Chen, we don't ask for much. How about the human emperor sect give up 50 quotas for each force? Everyone chimed in. Hearing this, a cold glint flashed in Chenbai's eyes. Give up 50 quotas for each force? It might not sound like a lot, but one had to know that the total number of forces in the human emperor continent was at least 800, if not 1,000. How is this possible? Moreover, Chenbai might have agreed if the wine Taoist hadn't given all the quotas to the moral emperor sect. However, it had already been confirmed that the quotas would be given to the moral emperor sect, so how could Chenbai give them up for nothing? Humans were sometimes like this. They wouldn't feel anything if they lost something that didn't belong to them, but once they obtained something, they probably wouldn't want to lose it. It could be said that he had already swallowed the quota. It was absolutely impossible for Chenbai to take it out at this time. Therefore, Chenbai did not hesitate at all when he heard the crowd's words. He immediately replied coldly. The quota already belongs to my human emperor sect. If there's nothing else, please leave. His words were already very clear. Hearing this, the various sect leaders' faces turned cold. Elder Chen, what do you mean by this? What if we don't leave? In order to survive, the crowd naturally could not just leave like this. Upon hearing these words, without any warning, Chenbai immediately pointed his finger and instantly killed one of the sect leaders. After which, he coldly said, "If you don't leave, you'll die." Time was of the essence. Chenbai was not in the mood to talk nonsense with these people. There was no way he would give up the quota. After Chenbai made his move, the great sage from the human emperor sect also rushed over and stared coldly at the various sect leaders present. In order to survive, the human emperor sect naturally wouldn't talk about morality. Many disciples of the human emperor sect still boarded the starship in an orderly manner. Looking at this scene, the wine Taoist and Li Qiu had no intention of intervening. Previously, they didn't want the quota given to these forces. Now, they wanted to snatch it away. How could that be? Would the human emperor sect agree? In the face of life and death, no matter who it is, they will reveal their true side. The wine Taoist said after taking a sip of wine as he looked at the two opposing forces. In terms of strength, the human emperor sect was definitely stronger. There was no doubt about that. Moreover, the wine Taoist did not have the slightest bit of sympathy for the sect leaders of these forces. This was because they had already given them a chance before. It was they who chose to give it up and let the human emperor sect take advantage of it. Without paying attention to the confrontation between the two sides, the disciples of the human emperor sect continued to board the starship in an orderly manner. Seeing more and more disciples of the human emperor sect board the starship, the sect leaders of the major forces could no longer sit still. Since they were going to die anyway, why not take a gamble? Even if the difference in strength between them and the human emperor sect was huge, so what? Looking at Chenbai and the other experts of the human emperor sect, one of the sect leaders shouted coldly, "Human emperor sect, you've gone too far. There are hundreds of thousands of quotas, and you want to fight alone? Even if we die today, we won't agree to it." "That's right, we won't agree to it even if we die," the sect leaders shouted angrily. Hearing this, a murderous intent flashed in Chenbai's eyes. He said coldly, "Since that's the case, you can all go to hell." As soon as he finished speaking, the great sage of the human emperor sect attacked together. It could be said that it was a one-sided massacre. In the face of the attack of the great sage of the human emperor sect, the sect leaders of the major forces had almost no power to fight back. They were killed directly on the spot. After killing these people, the disciples of the human emperor sect quickly boarded the starship. At this time, nearly 100 starships of the seventh realm were full of people. Each starship was fully loaded and could not add more people. Everything was ready. Li Qiu immediately ordered, "Let's go." The situation of the human emperor continent and the entire second wilderness was getting more and more dangerous. They could not stay for long. Following Li Qiu's order, nearly 100 starships of the seventh realm slowly rose into the sky. As the starships rose into the sky, the hundreds of thousands of disciples of the human emperor sect were saved. However, looking at the billions of living beings on the human emperor continent below, they had no chance at all. The crack in the sky was still expanding, and lightning still fell from the sky from time to time. There was no chance of survival. These people could only be destroyed along with the human emperor continent and the entire second wilderness. On the deck, Wine Daoist and Li Qiu could vaguely see that from all over the human emperor continent, pairs of desperate eyes were staring at the starships of the seventh realm slowly rising into the sky. In their eyes, the starships were their hope. Unfortunately, their only hope was getting farther and farther away from them. Chapter 11, Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1735. Nearly 100 starships of the seventh realm rose slowly and soon disappeared into the sky. The situation of the second desolate land was becoming more and more unstable. It could be destroyed at any moment. As a result, the Wine Daoist and the others did not dare to stay here for too long. Otherwise, if they did not leave before the second desolate land collapsed, it would be very dangerous. Of course, when Wine Taoist and the others evacuated, they also sent a message to Xiaochen, asking him to leave at once. After receiving Wine Taoist's message, Xiaochen did not waste any time. He immediately led many geniuses of the seventh realm and rushed out of the second wilderness. Although Xiaochen had not collected all the cultivation resources of the entire human emperor continent, he did not have enough time. Compared with treasures, his life was naturally more important. It would be embarrassing if he did not have the life to spend the money when the time came. Many experts of the seventh realm, including Xiaochen and the hundreds of thousands of disciples of the human emperor sect, left the human emperor continent and the second wilderness together. As for the others, they could only wait for death. Even if the saints and quasi-sage great masters among them could leave the human emperor continent with their own strength or by starships, they would never be able to escape the second wilderness. Ordinary spaceships were too slow to leave the second wilderness. However, the 100 or so spaceships from the seventh world were sending messages in the dark starry sky, shocking the disciples of the human emperor sect who were on them. Starships were not unfamiliar to them. There were many starships in the human emperor sect. However, compared with the starships of the seventh realm, anyone could see that the two were not at the same level. There was no comparison at all. Of course, there was no comparison. The cost of any one of the starships of the seventh realm was comparable to the cost of hundreds of ordinary starships. They sped all the way to the exit of the second wilderness at their fastest speed. At the same time, only half a day after Wine Taoist and the others left. Above the human emperor continent, there were also countless starships that soared into the sky. These starships belonged to various sects of the human emperor continent. At this time, they did not dare to look back and fled from the human emperor continent. The instinctive desire to survive made countless warriors of the human emperor continent want to escape from the human emperor continent because the current human emperor continent seemed to have fallen into hell. The crack in the sky completely split open, and bolts of lightning struck down from the sky without any reservation. At the same time, cracks appeared on the ground. Volcanoes erupted, and the sky fell and the earth cracked. Such a terrifying scene had scared many warriors of the human emperor continent out of their wits. They had never seen such a scene before. The sky was torn apart, and the earth began to fall apart. The originally vast Rumhuang continent seemed to have been forcibly disintegrated at this moment. It began to shatter into small pieces of land. It continued to split apart until it finally disappeared. Along with the disappearance of the land, the people who lived on it were naturally killed. Everyone wanted to escape. They thought that they would be safe once they escaped from the human emperor continent. Little did they know that the outcome would not change. The collapse of the continent would be followed by the fall of the entire second wilderness. Therefore, no matter how these people escaped, their fate was almost sealed. On the human emperor continent, countless creatures would be killed in an instant. In the face of such a doomsday, no human could resist. No matter how high one's cultivation was, as long as it was not at the level of Luoli and the others, there was no way one could resist in the face of such a doomsday. Even immortal emperors like Luoli and the others did not dare to say that they could escape unscathed in the face of such a doomsday. It was not that tragic because everything happened in an instant, almost in the blink of an eye. Before you could even react, you had already been obliterated. Consciousness, body, and soul dissipated almost at the same time. It was almost as if you had evaporated from the world. There were no tragic screams, no bloody scenes, but in an instant, you no longer existed in this world. The human emperor continent began to collapse, and at the same time, the other continents were the same. The Wine Taoist and the others were on a starship and were about to fly out of the second wilderness. On nearly 100 starships, hundreds of thousands of disciples of the human emperor's sect had been rescued. However, they did not have the slightest bit of excitement and joy after surviving the disaster. This was because their hometown had been completely destroyed. Perhaps their relatives and friends on the human emperor continent had also been killed. Therefore, how could they be happy? In the overcrowded starship, many disciples of the human emperor's sect were silent. Some of them were even shedding tears. In the face of this scene, the elders of the human emperor's sect were also silent. What happened in the second wilderness had made them feel as if half of their hearts had died. Like the others, several young men were sitting in a circle beside Chenbai and the great sage of the human emperor sect. These people were the most outstanding among the disciples of the human emperor sect. They had already reached the sage realm great perfection at such a young age. Even if they were not considered the top among the geniuses of the seventh realm, they could definitely reach the middle level. They had supreme talent, but at this moment, their expressions were very downcast. After a long while, the young man who was the leader strode to Chenbai and bowed respectfully. Ancestor, was all of this really caused by the will of the heavenly way? This young man was called Hao Yun. He was the #1 disciple of the human emperor sect. He was extremely talented and was once a famous genius in the human emperor continent and even the entire second wilderness. However, at this moment, Hao Yun's eyes were no longer as bright as before. There were only doubts, disappointment, and of course, deep hatred in them. Hearing this, Chenbai raised his head and looked at him. He wanted to say something, but he swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. After a long silence, Chenbai finally nodded slightly and said, "It should be." Chenbai was not sure that the destruction of the second wilderness was caused by the will of the heavenly way, but his answer had obviously given Hao Yun the answer he wanted. After hearing Chenbai's words, the disappointment and bewilderment in Hao Yun's eyes vanished completely. Instead, it was replaced by an extremely dense hatred. Hao Yun hated. He hated the will of the heavenly way for doing this. Even if the will of the heavenly way had given up on them, why did it have to destroy the second wilderness? Didn't it know that by doing so, countless creatures in the second wilderness would be destroyed? Chapter 12, Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1736. Hao Yun was originally a disciple of a large clan in the human emperor continent. Hao Yun knew that his parents and relatives were probably all dead in the second wilderness. Just because of a single thought from the heavenly way in the second wilderness, countless creatures in the entire second wilderness had to die. Why? Why? Hao Yun had never understood why all the creatures in the second wilderness had to die like ants just because of a single thought. Now, Hao Yun understood. It was because of strength, because the will of the heavenly Tao had such strength. In the eyes of the will of the heavenly Tao, the numerous living beings in the second desolation were like sand in a desert. They were insignificant. Without the second wilderness, what was the use of the creatures in the second wilderness? It was better to die in glory than to live in dishonor. If he couldn't have it, the Hachibara Senkai wouldn't have it either. The hatred in his heart had reached its peak. The reason why Hao Yun had boarded the starship of the seventh world was because Chen Bai and the others had forced him. With Hao Yun's personality, if his family had no chance of survival, he would definitely not live alone. However, how could Chen Bai and the others let such a good seedling like Hao Yun die just like that? As a result, they brought him onto the starship of the seventh world without any explanation. A complicated expression flashed across Chen Bai's eyes when he sensed the monstrous hatred that erupted from Hao Yun's body. He wanted to console her, but he did not know what to say. In the end, he could only sigh. After Chen Bai sighed, Hao Yun fell silent for a moment. Then, he said firmly, "Ancestor, I want to join the Hachibara Senkai." Join the Hachibara Senkai? Chen Bai wasn't the only one who was surprised. Even the people around, including the great sage of the imperial sect, looked at Hao Yun in surprise. In fact, Hao Yun's thoughts were very simple. The heavenly way in the second wilderness had destroyed the entire second wilderness and killed Hao Yun's entire family. Therefore, Hao Yun would join the Hachibara Senkai because only the Hachibara Senkai could contend against the entire eighth wilderness. One day, when Hao Yun had the strength, he would definitely avenge his family. The group of imperial sect's great holy sovereigns were surprised. However, Hao Yun had already made up her mind to join the eight desolate immortal world before anyone could reply. After watching Hao Yun leave, one of the human emperor sect's great sage emperors looked bitterly at Chen Bai and said, "Master, let him go. If Hao Yun can join the Hachibara Senkai, it will be his good fortune." However, Chen Bai said. Chen Bai didn't stop Hao Yun from wanting to join the Hachibara Senkai. In Chen Bai's opinion, if Hao Yun could really join the Hachibara Senkai, it would be his good fortune. After all, if he could cultivate in the Hachibara Senkai, it would definitely be thousands of times better than in the human emperor sect. However, in Chen Bai's opinion, it wouldn't be easy for Hao Yun to join the Hachibara Senkai. In the human emperor sect, Hao Yun's talent was definitely the best. However, if he were to join the Hachibara Senkai, it would be a different story. In the Hachibara Senkai, there were many people who were more talented than Hao Yun. There were also many people who had a higher cultivation than him. It was like the difference between the head of a chicken and the tail of a phoenix. In the human emperor sect, Hao Yun was the head of the chicken. However, if he were to join the Hachibara Senkai, Hao Yun would become the tail. Even so, in Chen Bai's opinion, the tail of a phoenix was far better than the head of a chicken. No matter what, even if he was only the tail, he had successfully joined the ranks of a phoenix and was no longer a pheasant. Moreover, if Hao Yun could really join the Hachibara Senkai, it would be a good thing for the human emperor sect. After all, the human emperor sect would definitely follow the Hachibara Senkai to the first wilderness. When that time came, if they wanted to gain a foothold in the unfamiliar environment of the first wilderness, if they could obtain the help of the Hachibara Senkai, even if it was just a little, it would be enough for the human emperor sect to benefit immensely. If Hao Yun joined the Hachibara Senkai, it would be tantamount to drawing a line between the human emperor sect and the Hachibara Senkai. Everything would depend on Hao Yun's luck. Chen Bai sighed in his heart. He was determined to join the Hachibara Senkai, not for anything else, but for revenge. However, when Hao Yun returned to his previous seat, the other young men who had been sitting with Hao Yun looked at him and asked, "Senior brother Hao Yun, do you really want to join the Hachibara Senkai?" "That's right." Hao Yun nodded solemnly in response to everyone's questions. "I must join the Hachibara Senkai, no matter what." After making up his mind, Hao Yun finally waited for an expert of the immoral realm from the seventh realm. Without any hesitation, Hao Yun immediately went up to this person and bowed respectfully. Seeing Hao Yun suddenly appear in front of him and block his way, the expert of the seventh realm did not get angry. Instead, he asked calmly, "What's the matter?" In fact, the experts of the seventh realm treated the people of the human emperor sect quite well. At least, there was no bullying. Of course, this was also because of the Wine Taoists' special order. Hearing this, Hao Yun immediately said, "Senior, I want to join the Hachibara Senkai." This was the first time Hao Yun was so close to an expert of the immoral realm, so he was definitely nervous. However, for the sake of revenge, Haoyan forced himself to say this. Hearing this, the expert of the seventh realm sized Haoyan up with interest. He was young and had the cultivation of the Saint Realm at the great attainment level. Not bad. The expert of the immortal realm smiled and said softly, if the younger generation wants to join the Hachibara Senkai, it's useless to come to me. You'll need the heirs of each realm. Our Hachibara Senkai is divided into 8 realms. Which one do you want to join? Haoyan didn't know much about the Hachibara Senkai. Hearing this, Haoyan was stunned. However, he quickly asked, Senior, what about you? May I ask which realm you're from, Senior? Me? We're all from the 7th realm. If you want to join the 7th realm, you can find the heir of our realm when we get there. As long as he agrees, you can join the 7th realm. Hearing this, the expert of the immortal realm laughed heartily and turned to leave. However, before he could take 2 steps, Haoyan's voice came from behind him. She was nervous and scared. After all, if she kept pestering an expert of the immortal realm, if he got angry, Haoyan would definitely suffer. It wouldn't be strange if she was slapped to death. Senior, who is the heir of the 7th realm? How should I find him? Suppressing the nervousness and fear in his heart, the expert of the 7th realm was patient. He didn't even turn his head when he heard Haoyan's words. You'll naturally see him when the time comes. But let me remind you that the heir of the 7th realm has a bad temper. Be smart when the time comes. Chapter 13, Collecting Monthly Votes, Recommending. Chapter 1737. You'll see him then. With that, the immortal realm cultivator from the 7th realm left. Haoyan clenched her fists tightly and said with determination in her eyes, the heir of the 7th realm. I'll definitely join the Hachibara Senkai. If you wanted to join the 8-Baron immortal world, you either had to get the approval of the Sector Lord or the heirs. However, the Sector Lord usually didn't care about the younger generation. As long as the heirs agreed, there would be no problem. Of course, as for the older generation, the heirs wouldn't care about them either. At most, they would recommend them. In the end, the Sector Lord would make the decision personally. Haoyan returned to her seat. She was very curious about the heir of the 7th realm that the immortal realm cultivator had mentioned. She didn't know much about the Hachibara Senkai, but she had heard a little about the Hachibara Senkai's heir. She only knew that the Hachibara Senkai's heirs were all young, but their cultivations were extremely terrifying. All of them had reached the immortal realm. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that if someone like Haoyan stood at the peak of the younger generation in the human emperor continent, then the Hachibara Senkai's heirs, like Xiaochen, were already at the peak of the younger generation in the entire 8-Baron world. Apart from the 2nd Baron world, Xiaochen was definitely at the top of the younger generation in the entire 8-Baron world. Haoyan was very curious about what kind of person the heir of the 7th realm was. Although she didn't get any substantial information from the immortal realm cultivator, Haoyan was still keenly aware that when he talked about the heir of the 7th realm, the immortal realm cultivator's eyes unconsciously revealed a trace of reverence and even a trace of fear when he spoke about the heir of the 7th realm. Yes, it was fear. The immortal realm cultivator from the 7th realm was a little afraid of Xiaochen, but it made sense. After what Xiaochen had done in the 7th realm, who below the immortal realm wouldn't be afraid of him? Even some immortal venerables were extremely afraid of Xiaochen. After all, Xiaochen had killed more than one immortal venerable. They were looking forward to seeing the heir of the 7th realm. Just like that, the star ships of the 7th realm quickly flew toward the exit of the 2nd wilderness. One day later, nearly 100 star ships from the 7th realm arrived at the exit of the 2nd wasteland because they were traveling at full speed this time. They rushed out of the exit of the 2nd wasteland and landed on the Black Palace of the 7th world. In just one day, the 2nd wasteland had turned into hell. Countless continents collapsed, and spatial storms raged. It was as if they had reached the critical point of destruction. However, no matter what happened to the 2nd desolate land, it had nothing to do with them anymore. They had successfully reached the Black Palace in the seventh realm. What happened to the second desolate land could no longer threaten them. Nearly 100 starships slowly landed on the main square of the Black Palace in the seventh realm. Then, disciples of the human emperor's sect walked out of the starships one after another. Everyone looked around curiously at the majestic and domineering Black Palace in front of them. Of course, no one dared to do anything here. They all knew what this place was. Not only them, but even the great sage of the human emperor's sect didn't dare to do anything. Following the arrival of the crowd, many figures quickly appeared from the Black Palace. Some of them looked young, some were white-haired old men, and some were middle-aged men with strong bodies. Although none of them exuded the slightest bit of aura, the people of the human emperor's sect still felt immense pressure in the face of these people. Ordinary disciples didn't know, but the great sage like Chenbai knew very well that although these people didn't seem to be dangerous, they were all immortal realm cultivators at the very least. They were extremely nervous, but fortunately, the experts of the seventh realm didn't mean to make things difficult for them. They weren't arrogant at all. It should be known that the higher one's status was, the less he had the habit of bullying others because there was no need to do so. In the eyes of the experts of the seventh realm, the disciples of the human emperor's sect weren't important at all. Therefore, there was no need to make things difficult for them to show the strength of the seventh realm. Moreover, the strength of the seventh realm was never shown by making things difficult for them. It was originally very strong. Old drunkard, how is it? Where are the heirs of Kunlun and the others? A middle-aged man landed in front of Wine Taoist and Li Qiu and asked with a smile. As they were talking, another starship landed slowly. It was the starship that Xiao Chen and the others were on. Xiao Chen and the others had returned safely. As the starship landed, the young geniuses of the seventh realm walked down from the deck one after another. Among the crowd, Hao Yun's eyes were fixed on them, trying to find Xiao Chen. Unfortunately, Hao Yun didn't know who the heirs of the seventh realm was. Just as Hao Yun was extremely anxious, she suddenly saw the immortal realm expert who had spoken to her before. Without thinking, Hao Yun immediately ran to him. At this moment, the immortal realm expert was talking to the other people of the seventh realm. It was indeed a bit abrupt. Hao Yun went to him directly and said nervously, "Senior, I." The people who were talking were suddenly interrupted by Hao Yun's voice. Immediately, one of them snorted unhappily. Where did this little girl come from? Don't you know any manners? Can't you see that we're talking? The immortal realm expert's temper was obviously much more impatient. Hearing this, Hao Yun's face turned ghastly pale. Fortunately, the expert who had spoken to her on the starship smiled and said, "Brother, it's just a kid. Don't scare him. This kid wants to join the Hachibara Senkai. He's probably here to ask about the heirs of Kunlun." Since this person had helped her out, the others didn't make things difficult for Hao Yun anymore. Then, this person glanced at Hao Yun and pointed at the starship that Xiao Chen and the others were on with a smile. There, that's the heir of the seventh realm, Xiao Chen. Hao Yun looked in the direction that this person was pointing at and saw a demonic young man in white standing proudly on the deck. He had white hair and blood-red eyes. Hao Yun had always thought that she was pretty, and she had countless admirers in the Runhuang sect. However, it was only when she saw Xiao Chen that she realized that there was actually such a good-looking man in the world. Hao Yun seemed to be unable to move her eyes away from him. She stared at Xiao Chen and couldn't help but murmur softly, "You're so handsome." This is the heir of the seventh realm, Chapter 14. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1738. This was the seventh time she had seen someone like the Hachibara Senkai's heir. She murmured to herself. Ever since she was young, Hao Yun had never taken any of her peers seriously on the Runhuang continent. However, at this moment, when she faced Xiao Chen, Hao Yun found that an invisible pressure was constantly sweeping towards her. Xiao Chen was definitely not older than Hao Yun, but in Hao Yun's eyes, Xiao Chen was like a mountain. She felt helpless. It was somewhat laughable. If someone had told Hao Yin before this that there was someone among the younger generation who could make her feel powerless and unable to resist, Hao Yin would have scoffed. But now, after facing Xiaochen for real, Hao Yin softly felt the gap between the two of them. Xiaochen did not do anything special. His aura was also restrained to the extreme. But even so, Hao Yin still felt a great pressure. As if sensing Hao Yin's gaze, Xiaochen, who had been talking to Yu Shujin, suddenly turned his eyes. Through the crowd, his gaze fell directly on Hao Yin. Being stared at by that pair of demonic blood-red eyes, Hao Yin froze on the spot, as if she had been struck by a spell. With just a glance, Xiaochen looked away. He did not know Hao Yin. As Xiaochen looked away, Hao Yin secretly let out a sigh of relief. But in that instant, Hao Yin realized that her back was actually drenched in sweat. As if sensing Hao Yin's change, the seventh world's immortal realm expert beside her smiled. "What? You don't have the courage to go up? If you don't even have the courage to speak to our heir, then don't even think about joining the seventh world." With that, the immortal realm expert patted Hao Yin's shoulder gently. Whether Hao Yin had the courage to face Xiaochen was something she had to overcome. If she did not even have the courage to face Xiaochen, then there was no need to talk about joining the seventh world. With that, without waiting for Hao Yin's reply, the immortal realm expert from the seventh world left with his companions. Hao Yin stood there alone, looking at Xiaochen from afar. She took a deep breath. That's right. If she did not even have the courage to face Xiaochen, then there was no need to talk about joining the seventh world. Clenching her fists, Hao Yin braced herself and walked toward Xiaochen. As Hao Yin walked toward Xiaochen, the starship of the eighth world's Yishao slowly landed. The prides of the eighth world also walked down from the starship. Yishao was among them. As soon as he returned, Yishao went directly to Xiaochen's side and said with a complicated expression, "Xiaochen, how are things on your side?" "It's the same," Xiaochen said calmly. The operation to save the second desolate land had ended in failure. However, it could not be helped. This matter was indeed beyond the ability of the Hachibara Senkai. Moreover, the people of the second desolate land were extremely resistant to the Hachibara Senkai. This was also one of the problems. It was not hard to imagine that even at the moment of death, there were still many people in the second desolate land who believed that the second desolate land will of the heavenly way would come to save them. In their eyes, the Hachibara Senkai was a group of thieves from the beginning to the end. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Yishao shook his head helplessly. He wanted to save the second desolate land, but they did not give him the chance at all. However, it was useless to say anything now. Just as Yishao came to Xiaochen's side and the two of them were talking, Hao Yin also came to Xiaochen. However, when he was dozens of meters away from Xiaochen, Hao Yin was stopped by a young genius from the seventh realm. "What's the matter?" The genius's attitude was rather mild. He was not arrogant just because Hao Yin was a disciple of the human emperor sect. Hearing this, Hao Yin did not dare to be impudent at all. After all, in the seventh realm, his status, talent, and strength were all nothing. The arrogance he had in the human emperor sect before should be restrained. Bowing respectfully to the genius, Hao Yin said, "Senior brother, I want to see Xiaochen's heir." "Want to see the heir?" Hearing this, the genius looked Hao Yin up and down and said, "Wait a moment." With that, he walked to Xiaochen. When he came to Xiaochen, the genius said to Xiaochen, "Heir, a disciple of the human emperor sect wants to see you." Hearing this, Xiaochen glanced at Hao Yin, who was waiting not far away, and nodded. Seeing this, the genius brought Hao Yin to Xiaochen. Different from before, he was now standing in front of Xiaochen. The two were less than 2 meters apart. At this moment, Hao Yin was even more nervous. Lowering his head, he did not dare to look directly at Xiaochen. Seeing this, Xiaochen spoke first. "What is it?" His voice was calm and indifferent. Hearing this, Hao Yin gathered his courage and stuttered, I want to join the seventh realm." Hao Yin really wanted to join the seventh realm, because only here could he obtain the power he wanted. Seeing this, Xiaochen's expression did not change. Then he asked, "Join the seventh realm? Why?" Revenge. My family died this time. I want revenge. The seventh realm can give me more cultivation resources. Hearing this, Haoyan raised his head and looked directly at Xiaochen for the first time. The hatred in his heart made Haoyan want to become stronger. Seeing the thick hatred in Haoyan's eyes, Xiaochen seemed to see himself in the past. Hadn't he been like this when he'd first joined the seventh realm? At this moment, Haoyan was so similar to Xiaochen in the past. They both had thick hatred in their hearts. Their families had died because of the will of the heavenly way. Xiaochen looked at Haoyan and did not speak for a long time. Facing Xiaochen's gaze, Haoyan's back was already soaked in sweat. Xiaochen's blood-red eyes seemed to see through him. Haoyan had never felt this kind of pressure, not even when facing Chen Bai. After looking at Haoyan for a while, Xiaochen took out a storage ring from his storage ring and threw it to Haoyan. Take these cultivation resources. If you can break through to the quasi-saint realm before arriving at the first wilderness, I'll let you join the seventh wilderness. Haoyan's cultivation was now at the saint realm great fulfillment. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Haoyan was stunned at first, but then he nodded heavily. Thank you, heir. Xiaochen did not reject Haoyan. Instead, he gave Haoyan a lot of cultivation resources. As for whether he could break through to the quasi-saint realm, it would depend on his own efforts and talent. However, it would take at least a month to reach the first wilderness from here. Haoyan still had a high chance of breaking through. Chapter 15, Collecting, Monthly Votes, Recommending. Chapter 1739. Haoyan's talent was definitely not bad. Although she could not be considered as the top in the seventh realm, she was at least above average. It could be seen that Haoyan sincerely wanted to join the seventh realm. Moreover, Haoyan's experience was very similar to his in the past. Therefore, Xiaochen also agreed to Haoyan's request. As for breaking through to the quasi-saint realm, it should not be difficult for Haoyan. Moreover, she was supported by the cultivation resources that Xiaochen had given her. Starships returned one after another. The warriors who were rescued from the second desolate land were also temporarily settled down in the palaces and starships of the Hachibara Senkai under the arrangements of the Hachibara Senkai's experts. The rescue work was basically completed. Although only a few million people were rescued, which was just a drop in the ocean compared to the entire second desolate land, there was no other way. This was the best that the Hachibara Senkai could do. After everyone had settled down, the situation in the second desolate land had reached its final juncture. All the continents in the second desolate land had fallen apart. The violent void storm swept across the entire second desolate land. At the same time, the terrifying lightning was also rampant. Almost half of the living beings in the second desolate land had died. The fate of those who were still persevering was almost predetermined. Under such a sweeping doomsday, there was no way for them to survive. Countless starships were flying frantically in the second desolate land. They wanted to escape from the second desolate land and survive. Unfortunately, such a struggle was useless. The doomsday swept across the entire second desolate land. Countless living beings died every second. With the arrival of the true doomsday of the second desolate land, the will of the heavenly way slowly opened their eyes in all directions. The destruction of the second desolate land was a foregone conclusion. Within 3 days, the entire second desolate land would become a land of death. There would be no living beings and no trace of spiritual energy. Well, since the second desolate land has been destroyed, it's time for us to withdraw, the will of the heavenly way of the third desolate land said faintly after glancing at everyone present. The second desolate land had been completely destroyed. There was no point in staying here. Hearing this, the will of the heavenly way nodded slightly and did not say anything more. They had personally destroyed a desolate land and killed tens of billions of living beings. However, there was not the slightest hint of sadness on the faces of the wills of the heavenly Tao. Perhaps in their eyes, the lives of the countless living beings in the second wilderness were nothing. They did not know how to feel sad at all. Perhaps as the wills of the heavenly Daos, they did not know what sadness and pity were from the day they were born. Since their goal had been achieved, the will of the heavenly way of the second desolate land decided to temporarily retreat. As for the will of the heavenly way of the second desolate land, he naturally returned to the seventh desolate land with the will of the heavenly way of the seventh desolate land. The experts of the eight desolate land retreated one after another. As for the Hachibara Senkai, everyone could feel the destruction of the second desolate land in the next 2 days. The warriors who had escaped from the second desolate land were all grieving. Many of their relatives and friends were probably dead by now. Facing the death of their relatives and friends, they had no way to stop it. They could only watch helplessly. This was the end of the world. Even Luoli and the other sector lords could not stop it, let alone them. On this day, the sector lords also gave the order to retreat. Many spaceships in the majestic palace slowly flew out of the second desolate land and rushed towards the first desolate land. The first desolate land was the headquarters of the Hachibara Senkai. It was a place that was truly under the control of the Hachibara Senkai. The people there no longer believed in the will of the heavenly way. Instead, they believed in the Hachibara Senkai and believed in themselves. The first desolate land was the place where the Hachibara Senkai was born. It was also the only place that was not under the control of the will of the heavenly way. Everyone was very curious about the first desolate land, including Xiaochen. He had heard from Li Qiu and the others that the first desolate land was a very magical place. In the first desolate land, there was no heaven's punishment. When warriors broke through the sage realm, quasi-sage realm, or great sage realm, there would be no heaven's punishment. The reason was very simple. The first desolate land no longer had the will of the heavenly way. Naturally, there was no heaven's punishment. Because of this, the cultivation environment in the first desolate land was actually much better than the other desolates. The number of experts was also higher. This was the first time that Xiaochen had heard of a world without the will of the heavenly way. As the spaceships and palaces of the Hachibara Senkai flew towards the first desolate land, everyone returned to their normal lives. As for the second desolate land, although many people were sad, it could not be helped. The second desolate land no longer existed. The first desolate land had been destroyed. From now on, only the 7 desolates were left in the 8 desolates world. The place where the second desolate land used to be had become a land of death. There were no living creatures and no trace of spiritual qi. As usual, Xiaochen spent every day cultivating. On this day, after a day of cultivation, Xiaochen received an invitation from Guanhong to go to his cave residence for a drink. With Hong Lian and Yi Xiao, the 3 of them went directly to Guanhong's cave residence in the Second World Palace. Fu Rui, Quan Feng, Qiu Ru, Lu Xiao, and the rest of the Hachibara Senkai's heirs were all there. Everyone sat down. Soon, maids served the food and wine. This was not the first time they had gathered for a drink. This time, the heirs of Kunlun heirs had a chance to interact with each other. Other than the conflict between Fu Rui and Xiaochen when they first met, everyone got along well. Not only were they destined to have few friends, but there were also not many people in the entire 8 desolates who were qualified to sit with them on equal footing. Naturally, no one would pay attention to those they didn't think highly of. Only those who were also heirs of Kunlun's field were worthy of their attention. They did not talk about the second desolate land. After all, it was a foregone conclusion. There was no point in talking about it. They drank and chatted, talking about meaningless topics. However, in the midst of this chat, Qiu Ru, who was always cold and reserved, suddenly looked at Xiaochen and Hong Xiu. "We're about to reach the first desolate land. Hong Xiu, don't you plan to tell Xiaochen about Mufan?" Hong Xiu's face darkened at the mention of Mufan again. On the other hand, Xiaochen, who was beside her, drank a mouthful of wine without any change in his expression. He was not worried at all, as if it had nothing to do with him. Chapter 16, Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1740. When Qiu Ru suddenly mentioned Mufan, Hong Xiu's face instantly turned gloomy. As for Xiao Chen, he had an indifferent attitude. He continued to drink and eat, without the slightest bit of worry. Seeing that Xiao Chen had no reaction at all, Qiu Ru opened her mouth and said, "Aren't you curious about the relationship between Mu Fan and Hong Xiu at all?" Faced with Qiu Ru's question, Xiao Chen took a sip of wine. Instead of answering, he asked, "Why should I be curious?" With regards to Mu Fan, Xiao Chen could see some clues from the changes in everyone's expression. He could also guess that there must be some relationship between him and Hong Xiu, but so what? Xiao Chen didn't know who Mu Fan was, nor was he interested in knowing him. As for his relationship with Hong Xiu, Xiao Chen had no interest in it at all. Originally, he didn't know how to deal with his relationship with Hong Xiu. How could Xiao Chen care too much about these things? Xiao Chen wasn't like other men. Although they said that they weren't interested in this woman, their bodies were very honest. Especially when it came to matters related to this woman, they were incomparably concerned. Since he wasn't prepared to accept Hong Xiu, then he shouldn't meddle in her affairs. Moreover, he shouldn't show how gentle he was, because that was purely a sign of illness. If there was a way, Xiao Chen would even let Hong Xiu move out of his cave residence. Unfortunately, this wasn't possible. He wouldn't take the initiative to show any concern for Hong Xiu, because Xiao Chen hadn't thought about how to deal with the relationship between him and Hong Xiu. Seeing Xiao Chen's indifferent look, a hint of loneliness flashed in Hong Xiu's eyes. Hong Xiu knew that Xiao Chen had been deliberately distancing himself from her. Even until now, although Xiao Chen didn't dislike Hong Xiu following by his side, he had never shown the slightest bit of concern and gentleness towards Hong Xiu. The relationship between the two of them was at most friends. At least, that was what Xiao Chen showed. Hearing Xiao Chen's reply, Qiu Ru was stunned for a moment. Then, she said in a bad mood, "I really don't know what Hong Xiu sees in you. However, I think you need to know about Mu Fan's matter. Because even if you don't look for him, he will come looking for you." Qiu Ru didn't care if Xiao Chen was listening to her and was about to tell him about Mu Fan. Seeing this, Hong Xiu begged, "Qiu Ru, you lass, you'll have to tell him sooner or later. You know Mu Fan's personality. Telling him will allow him to be prepared." Hong Xiu obviously didn't want Qiu Ru to talk too much about Mu Fan, but Qiu Ru felt that it was necessary to let Xiao Chen know about this. Hearing Qiu Ru's words, Hong Xiu's expression was complicated, but she didn't stop her because Qiu Ru was right. She should tell Xiao Chen about Mu Fan. Qiu Ru turned to Xiao Chen again and said coldly, "This time, only the people from the First Realm didn't come to the battle with the 8 barons. The First Realm's Realm Master is called Mu Tai. He is Mu Fan's father and Hong Xiu's father. He used to be husband and wife with the Red Lotus Realm Master. Mu Tai was Mu Fan's father and Hong Xiu's father. In this way, Mu Fan and Hong Xiu were biological siblings. Mu Fan was Hong Xiu's biological brother. However, did you think that they had a good relationship just because they were biological siblings? Obviously not. Since young, Mu Fan had shown great talent. Because he was Mu Tai's son, he was designated as the heir of the First Realm. His talent was outstanding and his personality was somewhat cold. For some unknown reason, perhaps it was because of the matter between Mu Tai and Hong Lian, Mu Fan had always hated Hong Lian and Hong Xiu ever since he was young. Especially for his sister, Hong Xiu, Mu Fan felt that she was a disgrace to him. Therefore, since young, Mu Fan had made things difficult for Hong Xiu more than once. "Good sister, I won't kill you, but I will take away everything around you." This was what Mu Fan had said to Hong Xiu when they were young. Later on, it was true. As long as Hong Xiu had something she loved, Mu Fan would destroy it at all costs. When she was young, Hong Xiu had raised a demonic beast. When Mu Fan found out about it, he immediately killed it. When she grew a little older, Hong Xiu had a few good friends by her side. However, without exception, they were all killed by Mu Fan. Because of this, even though Hong Xiu was the little princess of the 8th realm and everyone seemed to be respectful to her, one could clearly sense that she didn't have any friends in the 8th realm who could talk to her about everything. Everyone kept a certain distance from her. No wonder Xiao Chen hadn't realized that Hong Xiu had any good friends after interacting with her for so long. If there was one, it could only be Yi Xiao. Yi Xiao was Hong Xiu's best friend. He had always played the role of Hong Xiu's brother, but he wasn't her real brother. The reason why Yi Xiao could survive despite being so close to Hong Xiu was because Yi Xiao was also an heir. His strength wasn't much weaker than Mu Fan's, so Mu Fan couldn't do anything to him. However, many things had happened between Yi Xiao and Mu Fan. Mu Fan had ambushed Yi Xiao more than once, and his methods could be said to be unscrupulous. In the most dangerous time, Yi Xiao had almost died. If Hong Lian hadn't arrived in time, Yi Xiao would have been killed by Mu Fan. Mu Fan had said that he wanted everything around Hong Xiu, and he had done it. He didn't even let go of Yi Xiao, who was an heir. It could be said that he was crazy. As for why Mu Fan did this, no one knew. No one knew why he hated Hong Xiu so much and why he would treat his own sister like this. However, perhaps it was because Mu Fan had taken everything away from her when she was young, so Hong Xiu had a natural fear of Mu Fan. This wasn't because she was afraid that Mu Fan would kill her, but because she was afraid that Mu Fan would take away the things she loved. Thinking about it, even Yi Xiao had almost died in Mu Fan's hands. What about the others? They probably wouldn't be able to escape. Qiu told Xiaochen the truth about what had happened between Mu Fan and Hong Xiu. Hearing this, Xiaochen would have some reaction, but who would have thought that after hearing this, Xiaochen's expression didn't change at all, and he continued to drink and eat. Seeing Xiaochen like this, Qiu said unhappily, "Xiaochen, did you hear what I said?" "I heard it, but so what?" Hearing this, Xiaochen replied indifferently. "So what?" Hearing this, Qiu was furious. She looked at Xiaochen, and her eyes were filled with anger. "You, translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation." Chapter 1741. Qiu had already told Xiaochen everything, but Xiaochen still looked indifferent. Naturally, Qiu was very unhappy about this. In the Hachibara Senkai, just like the various sector lords, some sector lords were very kind due to their personalities, while others were very eccentric. Therefore, it was hard to tell which sector lord was stronger in terms of combat power, but there was a rough ranking of the degree of danger. Due to their personalities, there was a ranking of the degree of danger between the various sector lords. Therefore, it was the same for the heirs. Actually, just like the various sector lords, the heirs of the Hachibara Senkai had not engaged in any life and death battles, so it was hard to say how strong or weak the heirs were. However, due to their personalities, there was a rough ranking of the heirs in terms of danger. Among them, Mu Fan was undoubtedly the most dangerous of the Hachibara Senkai heirs. There was no doubt about this, and there was no debate about it. Qiu looked at Xiaochen with anger in her eyes. Taking a deep breath, she suppressed the anger in her heart and said, "Xiaochen, do you really not understand, or are you just pretending? Mu Fan is a madman. Given your relationship with Hong Xiu, he will definitely not let you off when you go to the first wilderness. With Mu Fan's temper, he would definitely attack Xiaochen. There was no need to talk about whether he dared or not. After all, Mu Fan had even dared to kill Yi Xiao, and it was not the first time he had done so." Qiu's purpose was to warn Xiaochen to be careful or to avoid contact with Mu Fan as much as possible. Unfortunately, Xiaochen did not seem to appreciate it at all. Qiu was very unhappy with Xiaochen's attitude. However, just as Qiu's voice fell, Yi Xiao, who was at the side, laughed without a care. "All right, why are you worried about him? Mu Fan is a lunatic. Do you think that Xiaochen is easy to deal with?" Other than Hong Xiu, Yi Xiao was the person who knew Xiaochen the best. Yi Xiao was not too worried about going to the first wilderness. After all, they were all heirs. Who would be afraid of who? Furthermore, Xiaochen wasn't someone who was easy to deal with. It was very clear that if Xiaochen were to go crazy, he wouldn't be any worse than Mu Fan. It was just that the two of them had different personalities. Frankly speaking, Mu Fan would do anything to achieve his goals. As for Xiaochen, he preferred to be straightforward and didn't like to play meaningless tricks. It could be said that one of them was secretly crazy, while the other was openly crazy. However, without exception, both of them were people who didn't care about the consequences at all. After hearing Yi Zhao's words, everyone present nodded slightly. They all thought about how Xiaochen had embarrassed Fu Rui when they first met. Indeed, compared to Mu Fan, Xiaochen wasn't easy to deal with. It seems that there will be a good show in the first wilderness this time, Fu Rui said with a smile. Xiaochen wasn't afraid of Mu Fan, and Mu Fan would definitely make a move on Xiaochen. As such, it was inevitable that the two of them would clash. In the face of everyone's discussion, Xiaochen didn't say anything. He just drank and ate alone. On the other hand, Hongxiu's face didn't look very good after talking about Mu Fan. Obviously, Mu Fan had left too much of a shadow in Hongxiu's heart. However, Xiaochen didn't intend to say anything about it. Moreover, what could he say in such a situation? Comfort Hongxiu and let her know that he was a gentleman? Then, he couldn't give her any promises? Since he couldn't give her too much, then he shouldn't provoke her. At least, that was what Xiaochen thought in his heart. At least, that was how it was before he truly accepted Hongxiu. Xiaochen didn't care about Mu Fan at all. Therefore, everyone stopped talking about Mu Fan and drank and chatted. Soon, it was late at night. After the banquet that night, Xiaochen and Hongxiu returned to their cave residences. However, to Xiaochen's surprise, Hongxiu took the initiative to move out the next day. She no longer pestered Xiaochen like before. Hongxiu knew what she meant. She was afraid that she would be implicated. Although Hongxiu knew that with Xiaochen's strength, he wasn't afraid of Mu Fan, as the saying goes, don't be afraid of a thief stealing, but be afraid of a thief remembering. It was impossible for Mu Fan to kill Xiaochen in an open and above-board manner. However, it was easier to dodge an open spear than an arrow in the dark. Moreover, Mu Fan was such a person. If he couldn't do it openly, he would definitely do it in the dark. Moreover, as long as someone was remembered by Mu Fan, they wouldn't have a good ending. For example, Yi Xiao almost lost her life in Mu Fan's hands. Mu Fan was definitely an extremely difficult person to deal with. Therefore, in order not to implicate Xiaochen, Hongxiu took the initiative to move out of Xiaochen's cave residence. Anyway, there were still chances in the future. As long as she kept a certain distance from Xiaochen in the first wilderness and didn't let Mu Fan remember Xiaochen, it would be fine. As for leaving the first wilderness, wasn't it the same? Knowing what Hongxiu was thinking, Xiaochen didn't say a word about Hongxiu moving out of his cave residence. He also didn't have any intention of persuading her to stay. Xiaochen didn't have the slightest change because of Hongxiu's departure. However, the little girl, Wan Wan, was different. She kept clamoring for Hongxiu to come back. After spending some time together, Wan Wan was also very fond of Hongxiu. However, after acting coquettishly a few times, she saw that Xiaochen was still indifferent. Wan Wan quickly understood that her father wouldn't ask Hongxiu to come back. There was no other way. Wan Wan didn't dare to disobey her father's decision. She also didn't mention asking Hongxiu to come back. However, every few days, Wan Wan would take the initiative to look for Hongxiu. Regarding this, Xiaochen didn't stop her too much. Hongxiu moved out. For a time, only Xiaochen, Wan Wan, and the wine Taoist were left in the cave residence. However, the wine Taoist went out to drink every day. Xiaochen almost didn't even see him. Therefore, for a time, the cave residence was deserted. He didn't know what to feel in his heart. Perhaps it was because he wasn't used to it. However, even if he wasn't used to it, what could he do? He couldn't give Hongxiu anything. It was rare to have peace. In the following days, Xiaochen once again immersed himself in bitter cultivation. More than 20 days passed in a row. On this day, Hao Yun, who had been in closed-door cultivation since he came to the 7th Realm Palace, finally broke through to the quasi-sage realm according to Xiaochen's request. After breaking through, Hao Yun was qualified to join the 7th Realm. Xiaochen didn't go back on his words. When Hao Yun just broke through, Yu Shujin took the initiative to find him and gave him the identity token that symbolized the 7th Realm's Heaven's Pride. At this point, Hao Yun was finally considered a member of the seventh realm. Chapter 18, Begging for Collection, Begging for Monthly Votes, Begging for Recommendation. Chapter 1742. Xiaochen did not pay too much attention to Hao Yun's matter. To Xiaochen, Hao Yun was just someone who had a similar experience as him. It was not enough to attract Xiaochen's attention. As usual, Xiaochen was immersed in his cultivation every day. However, on this day, Wan cried in front of Xiaochen. "Father, I saw Yanhong crying. Are you really not going to take a look?" It had been more than half a month since Hong Xiu moved out of his cave residence. Perhaps Hong Xiu was angry because he did not try to persuade her to stay. Therefore, during this period of time, Hong Xiu did not take the initiative to look for Xiaochen. However, Wan would go to Hong Xiu's place to play from time to time. Wan naturally did not understand the feelings between men and women. When he heard her words, Xiaochen simply said, "Children should not meddle in the affairs of adults." Obviously, he was not interested in explaining these things to a child. However, when she heard Xiaochen's words, Wan pouted angrily and said, "If you don't care, then don't care. Father doesn't care about Wan anymore. I'm going to tell Grand Master." After saying that, Wan turned around and ran away. Looking at Wan's back, Xiaochen helplessly shook his head and smiled bitterly. To be honest, Xiaochen did not know if he had been too heartless towards Hong Xiu. After all, Hong Xiu had truly treated him well. However, Xiaochen did not seem to have done anything for Hong Xiu. A trace of confusion flashed in his eyes. However, very quickly, the confusion in his heart turned into a sigh. Since I can't give her a future, why should I continue to be with her? Xiaochen had not taken his revenge and his family was still waiting for him to be resurrected. How could he be in the mood to care about these things? He no longer thought about Hong Xiu. In the next few days, Xiaochen continued to cultivate as usual. However, since Wan ran away in anger last time, she no longer cared about him. She even moved to live in Wine Daoist's courtyard. This made Xiaochen speechless. Xiaochen discovered that Wan was really spoiled. In the seventh realm, everyone doted on her. His father, Hong Xiu, and Grand Master, Wine Daoist, were all obedient to Wan. Only Xiaochen would scold Wan from time to time. The little girl was still angry with him, but Xiaochen did not care. He thought that things would get better after a while. The days passed peacefully. On this day, Wan, who had been angry with him for a few days, suddenly rushed to Xiaochen with a face full of anger. She pouted her small mouth as if she had suffered a great grievance. She looked at Xiaochen and said, "Father, do you not want Wan anymore?" "No." Xiaochen was taken aback when he heard that. What was the little girl up to this time? He did not understand, but he still shook his head and said. Xiaochen had already treated Wan as his own daughter, so naturally, he would not abandon her. Wan's adorable eyes were filled with tears as she said pitifully, "Don't worry, Wan. Then why haven't you come to find me for so many days?" These days, Wan was indeed angry with Xiaochen. However, the little girl's thoughts were very simple. She thought that Xiaochen would definitely take the initiative to find her. She did not expect that after so many days, Xiaochen did not have the slightest intention of looking for Wan. She missed Xiaochen very much. The little girl could not help but come to find him herself. Hearing this, Xiaochen smiled helplessly. He immediately stepped forward and hugged Wan. "Father is busy with cultivation. Moreover, it seems that you are angry with father first, isn't it? I don't care. I am a child. Father is an adult. How can you lower yourself to the level of a child?" Wan said. Hearing Wan's words, Xiaochen was speechless. Where did this little girl learn these things from? He felt that Wan was becoming more and more mischievous. He did not know what she was thinking all day. However, after being comforted by Xiaochen, the little girl quickly stopped crying and smiled. Luan naturally could not be angry with Xiaochen. In her eyes, Xiaochen was the closest person in the world. Although her grandmaster and Aunt Hong were good to her, in Luan's opinion, there was still a gap between them and Xiaochen. In Luan's heart, her father's position was irreplaceable. As the saying goes, children are fickle. Very soon, the little girl began to play in the courtyard as if nothing had happened. Seeing the happy smile on Luan's face, Xiaochen's eyes revealed a rare trace of gentleness. Shuru, Baihua, Lingyao, Tianyue. Look, this little girl is my daughter. She is also your daughter. There will be a day when I will revive you all and reunite your family. If Shuru and the others were still by his side, it would be the happiest moment for Xiaochen. He could not help but think of Qin Shuru and the other two girls. However, at this moment, Xiaochen's eyes did not have much sorrow. Instead, they were replaced with an incomparably determined expression. This was because Xiaochen firmly believed that he could revive them. No matter how difficult it was, Xiaochen had to do it. Moreover, Luan's existence gave Xiaochen unprecedented hope. During this period of time, Xiaochen naturally knew that Qin Shuru and the others' remnant souls had recovered greatly under Luan's nourishment. Although there was still a long way to go before they could completely recover, at least they were in the process of recovering. Seeing hope, Xiaochen firmly believed that he could succeed. It could be said that he had reconciled with Luan and her father. 3 days later, they finally arrived at the entrance of the first wilderness. The entire first wilderness was also enveloped by a huge formation. There was only one entrance for people to enter and exit. The Black Palace of the Seventh Realm slowly flew into the second wilderness. At the same time, Yishao took the initiative to find Xiaochen. The two of them sat in the pavilion in the courtyard and looked at Xiaochen. Yishao said with a smile, "We're here. Brother Xiaochen, this is your first time in the first wilderness, right? This is a world that is said to have no heaven and earth. It is not controlled by the will of the heavenly way here." They had finally arrived at the first wilderness. Hearing this, Xiaochen smiled slightly. At the same time, he was curious. He wanted to see with his own eyes what this so-called world that was not controlled by the will of the heavenly way looked like. He wanted to see how it was different from the other wastelands. He was full of expectations for the first wilderness. However, after hearing this, Yi Zhao's eyes flashed with a complicated look. After hesitating for a while, he finally spoke to Xiaochen. "Brother Xiaochen, I don't know if I should ask this question. However, if I don't ask, I'll feel really bad. So, please don't mind. What are your plans with junior sister Hongxiu? I can see that junior sister Hongxiu really likes you. During this period of time, junior sister Hongxiu's mood has been very bad. So, I want to ask, regarding Hongxiu, what do you think, Brother Xiaochen?" Chapter 19, Collecting, Monthly Votes, Recommending. Chapter 1743. Yishao looked at Xiaochen with a complicated expression. Although Yi Zhao's personality was extremely frivolous, he truly loved and cared for Hongxiu. Ever since Hongxiu moved out of Xiaochen's cave residence to prevent Mu Fan from attacking Xiaochen, Hongxiu was obviously in a bad mood. Yishao naturally noticed this. He thought that Xiaochen would be angry at his question, but Xiaochen did not. A strange look flashed across his eyes, and Xiaochen said plainly, "I can't give her anything, so I don't want to hold her back. But junior sister really likes you," Yishao said when he heard Xiaochen's words. Anyone could see that Hongxiu really liked Xiaochen. However, Xiaochen did not say anything and chose to remain silent. Xiaochen did not want to say much about Hongxiu. Moreover, Xiaochen did not know what to say. Seeing that Xiaochen had fallen into silence, Yishao did not continue to dwell on this issue. The Seventh Realm's Black Palace flew slowly in the first wilderness. After a day, it landed on a huge continent. This continent was called the Immortal Realm Continent, and it was the headquarters of the Hachibara Senkai. Almost all the warriors living on the Immortal Realm Continent were members of the Hachibara Senkai. Of course, they were not official members. They could only be considered as unofficial members, similar to the odd jobs disciples in the sect. Everyone knew that the Hachibara Senkai's requirements for official members were very high. The cultivation of the experts of the older generation had to be at least at the immortal realm, and the talent of the younger generation had to be the best of the best. After returning to the immortal realm continent, everyone was finally home. In the center of the immortal realm continent, there were 8 towering mountains. These 8 mountains could be considered as the Hachibara Senkai's headquarters. The 7th realm's Black Palace slowly landed on one of the mountain peaks. This mountain peak was called the 7th Peak, which was why it was called the Sea Region. It belonged to the 7th realm. The 8 mountain peaks seemed to have formed a mysterious array, causing the spiritual chi of heaven and earth to be extremely rich. Even the sky was drizzling. Don't underestimate these drizzles. These raindrops contained extremely rich spiritual chi and were called spiritual rain. The 100 peaks represented the 8 realms of the Hachibara Senkai. After the Black Palace of the 7th realm slowly descended on the 7th peak, the warriors rescued by Second Desolation began to move. Of course, they couldn't live here. They couldn't even live in the immortal realm. There were 8 continents in the first wilderness. The cultivators from the second wilderness would be arranged to live in the other continents. Of course, the cultivators from the same sect would be arranged to live in the other continents. Xiaochen didn't have to worry about the transfer and settling of the warriors of Second Desolation. This was his first time coming to the Immortal Realm continent. Xiaochen walked out of the cave residence with Yi Xiao and came to the main square. The drizzle in the sky didn't seem to stop. Xiaochen was amazed by the richness of the spiritual chi here. This was indeed a fairyland. It was probably the wish of all the warriors in the world to be able to cultivate here. Xiaochen had seen many wonderful places for cultivation, but so far, he had never seen any place that could compare to this place. What do you think? The 8 Immortal Mountain is not bad, right? Yi Xiao asked with a smile as he walked beside Xiaochen. The 8 Immortal Mountain was the name of these 8 mountains. It was also where the Hachibara Senkai's sect was located. Hearing Yi Xiao's words, Xiaochen nodded gently and said, "Well, it's very good. I guess it's difficult to find another place like this in the entire 8 Desolation world." The 8 Immortal Mountain was indeed a rare place. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Yi Xiao smiled proudly and said, "Of course. The 8 Immortal Mountain is the number 1 place in the 8 Desolation world." The two of them pondered as they walked. At the same time, the warriors from the other realms returned to their respective mountain peaks. This time, everyone returned to First Desolation. They would probably rest for a period of time and wouldn't leave for a while. Following the return of the powerhouses from the 7 realms, the entire 8 Immortal Mountain became lively again. One could see a magnificent palace towering above each mountain peak. Each palace represented one of the realms of the Hachibara Senkai. Xiaochen and Yi Xiao didn't pay too much attention to it. While the two of them were strolling idly, Xiaochen and Yi Xiao suddenly spotted Hong Xiu. However, at this moment, there was a gloomy young man in black clothes in front of Hong Xiu. Mu Fan. Upon seeing the black-clothed young man, Yi Xiao's eyes flashed with a cold glint as he said coldly. The black-clothed youth was Mu Fan. At this moment, in the main square, Mu Fan was blocking Hong Xiu's path. It could be seen that Hong Xiu's face was extremely ugly at this moment. Her face was filled with anger and a trace of fear. On the other hand, Mu Fan wore an ice-cold smile on his face and said unhurriedly, "My good sister, you've been gone for so many years. As your brother, I really want to die. Mu Fan, get out of my way." Hong Xiu didn't look happy at all and shouted coldly. Unfortunately, Mu Fan was unmoved by Hong Xiu's shout and continued to sneer. "Why? We haven't seen each other for so long and you're asking me to get lost as soon as we meet?" As he spoke, Mu Fan took a step forward and whispered into Hong Xiu's ear in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "My good little sister, after being away for so many years, have you made any new friends? If you have, you must tell me because I will personally send him to hell." Hong Xiu's body trembled uncontrollably. At this moment, Hong Xiu suddenly saw Xiao Chen and Yi Xiao walking over slowly. When she saw Xiao Chen, Hong Xiu's eyes instantly turned red and she looked extremely pitiful. Hong Xiu was really afraid when facing Mu Fan. This fear had nothing to do with her strength. It was a habit since she was young. Since she was young, Mu Fan could be said to be her nightmare. At this moment, Hong Xiu only wanted to hide behind Xiao Chen because this was the only way she could feel safe. Unfortunately, Xiao Chen didn't have any intention of attacking even though a cold glint flashed in his eyes. Instead, it was Yi Xiao who shouted, "Mu Fan, don't go overboard." Yi Xiao naturally wasn't afraid of Mu Fan. In fact, Yi Xiao's killing intent towards Mu Fan was extremely dense. However, when Mu Fan heard this, he turned around and looked at Yi Xiao with a cold smile. "Heh, there will be a day when I will personally kill you, Yi Xiao." End of chapter 20. Brothers, if you have a monthly ticket or a recommendation ticket, please support me. Thank you. Chapter 1744. I really can't take it anymore. I'll take a day off today. Brothers, please forgive me. Sword Master of 8 Desolations taking a day off. Please wait for a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 1745. Yi Xiao was filled with murderous intent towards Mu Fan. On the other hand, Mu Fan was the same towards Yi Xiao. Murderous intent flashed in Mu Fan's eyes as he spoke coldly to Yi Xiao. Hearing this, Yi Xiao snorted coldly and immediately went to Hong Xiu's side, obviously intending to protect her. Ever since she was young, everything around Hong Xiu, including her friends, had been taken away by Mu Fan. Only Yi Xiao was able to escape from Mu Fan's murderous hands because of her own strength. However, judging from the current situation, Mu Fan had never given up on killing Yi Xiao. As long as there was a chance, Mu Fan would definitely kill Yi Xiao immediately, not for any other reason but because of the relationship between Yi Xiao and Hong Xiu. The two of them stared at each other without backing down. Facing Mu Fan, Yi Xiao's heart could be said to be on high alert. This was because this guy was definitely someone who did not play by the rules. As long as he could achieve his goal, he would use any means. He stood in front of Hong Xiu without backing down. Mu Fan was the first to withdraw his gaze. In this place, under such circumstances, he was not confident that he could kill Yi Xiao. Hence, there was no need for him to take action. Mu Fan turned to look at Xiao Chen and did not say anything. He only said a few words to Hong Xiu and then left. "My good sister, you will be staying in the first desolation for quite some time. The two of us have plenty of time." As soon as he finished speaking, Mu Fan left without giving Hong Xiu a chance to reply. Following Mu Fan's departure, Hong Xiu's expression turned ugly. There was anger, hatred, and at the same time, fear. Whenever she faced Mu Fan, Hong Xiu's heart would always be filled with fear. Ever since she was young, Mu Fan had been Hong Xiu's nightmare. When Xiao Chen saw Mu Fan for the first time, he did not say anything. Of course, this was also because of Yi Xiao's presence. Xiao Chen was certain that Hong Xiu would not be in any danger. Otherwise, Xiao Chen would not have watched Hong Xiu get into trouble without doing anything. After Mu Fan left, Yi Xiao glanced at Hong Xiu, who was in a daze. He sighed softly and then turned to Xiao Chen. "Brother Xiao Chen, junior sister, and I will return to the 8th realm first. Let's meet again when we have time." "Okay." Hearing Yi Xiao's words, Xiao Chen nodded gently. Seeing this, Yi Xiao left with Hong Xiu. However, before she left, Hong Xiu looked at Xiao Chen pitifully. Facing Hong Xiu's gaze, Xiao Chen did not say a word. He knew that Hong Xiu needed comfort now, especially his comfort. However, even if Xiao Chen comforted Hong Xiu now, what would happen next? What could Xiao Chen give Hong Xiu? Without saying anything, he watched Yi Xiao and Hong Xiu leave. Then, Xiao Chen returned to his cave residence alone. He had lost interest in strolling around. Over the next few days, the Hachibara Senkai met with the warriors who had been rescued from the second wilderness and arranged for them to continue to establish their sects in the first wilderness. Xiaochen did not interfere with the arrangement of the warriors in the second wilderness at all. Xiaochen did not need to worry about these things. Of course, Xiaochen was not interested in this. He continued to cultivate every day. A few days passed, but Hong Xiu did not come to Xiaochen. Perhaps she was afraid that Mu Fan would come to make trouble for Xiaochen. However, on this day, Xiaochen had just finished a day of cultivation. In the evening, Yu Shujin took the initiative to look for Xiaochen. She wanted him to go to the Seven Realms continent tomorrow. The Seven Realms continent was one of the 8 continents in the first wilderness. It happened that the Seven Realms continent was under the jurisdiction of the Seventh Realm. The major sects on the Seven Realms continent actually followed the lead of the Seventh Realm. As the heir of the Seventh Realm, it was necessary for Xiaochen to go to the Seven Realms continent in person. Of course, this was only Yu Shujin's suggestion. As for whether Xiaochen was willing or not, it was up to Xiaochen. After all, Yu Shujin did not have the authority to order Xiaochen. Hearing Yu Shujin's words, Xiaochen pondered for a moment. Then, he did not refuse and nodded slightly. Help me arrange it. Anyway, he would not leave the first wilderness in a short period of time. There was no problem in going to the Seven Realms continent. Seeing that Xiaochen had agreed, Yu Shujin also nodded her head respectfully. To go to the Seven Realms continent, Xiaochen planned to take Luan Luan with him. The little girl had complained to him many times that Xiaochen had less time to accompany her. This time, going to the Seven Realms continent was his territory. It was not a big deal to take Luan Luan with him. Moreover, according to Yu Shujin, in the entire first wilderness, experts above the Immoral Realm were gathered in the Immoral Realm continent. As for the other continents, there were no experts above the Immoral Realm. Therefore, with Xiaochen's strength, there was no danger. It was a good opportunity to take Luan Luan out to play. This would prevent her from getting sick from staying in the Seventh Realm. After making up his mind, Xiaochen immediately ordered someone to call Luan Luan. She ran all the way to the courtyard and saw Xiaochen. Luan Luan happily rushed into Xiaochen's arms and affectionately called out, "Daddy." Facing Luan Luan, Xiaochen's mood couldn't help but improve. This little girl was indeed very cute. Xiaochen gently stroked the little girl's hair and said with a smile, "Daddy is going to the Seven Realms continent tomorrow. Luan Luan, do you want to go with Daddy?" Yes, Luan Luan wants to go." Hearing this, the little girl didn't hesitate at all. She immediately nodded and clamored to go with Xiaochen. In this regard, Xiaochen smiled and nodded. But soon, Luan Luan seemed to have thought of something strange. She blinked her big eyes and asked expectantly, "Daddy, will Aunt Hong come with us?" Ever since Hong Xiu moved out of her cave mansion, Luan Luan missed her very much. She couldn't help it. When she wasn't around, Hong Xiu spent most of her time with the little girl. Moreover, Hong Xiu had always wanted Luan Luan to acknowledge her as her mother. Unfortunately, the little girl was very clever and didn't agree. With the temperament of a child, it was natural for her to miss her mother. However, facing Luan Luan's expectation, Xiaochen shook his head and said, "Aunt Hong won't go." Hong Xiu had already returned to the Eighth Realm. Naturally, Xiaochen couldn't ask her to go with him. Hearing this, Luan Luan's eyes flashed with a touch of loneliness, but it quickly dissipated. Although Luan Luan was a little disappointed that Hong Xiu didn't go with them, she was already very happy to be able to go out and play with her daddy. As for yesterday's 4 chapters, I will make up for it after the Mid-Autumn Festival. Thank you for your support, brothers. In addition, I wish my brothers a happy Mid-Autumn Festival. Chapter 1746. From Luan Luan's point of view, being able to go out and play with Xiaochen was the happiest thing in the world. That night, the little girl was extremely excited. The night passed by quickly. By the next morning, Luan Luan had already washed up with the help of 2 maids. She kept urging Xiaochen to hurry up. "Father, why aren't we leaving yet?" Where are we going to leave? The little girl was already impatient. Facing Wan Wan's constant urging, Xiaochen could only helplessly smile and say, "Don't worry. Once everything is arranged, we can leave." Xiaochen had asked Yu Shujin to arrange for them to go to the Seventh Realm continent. Therefore, Xiaochen didn't know when they would leave. He had to wait for Yu Shujin's notice. Xiaochen gestured for Wan Wan to calm down, but how could the little girl be quiet at a time like this? There was nothing he could do about it. With Wan Wan beside him, he was unable to cultivate. Fortunately, Xiaochen had no choice but to play with Wan Wan. Although he wasn't related to Wan Wan by blood, Xiaochen did treat Wan Wan as his own daughter after spending some time together. It was indeed a very happy thing to play with his daughter. Xiaochen didn't have to wait for long. After about half an hour, Yu Shujin came and told Xiaochen that everything was ready and they could leave at any time. Hearing that they could finally leave, Wan Wan immediately became excited. In response, Xiaochen smiled helplessly and said, "Then let's go." The little girl couldn't wait for a moment. Naturally, Xiaochen could only comply with her wishes. Under Yu Shujin's lead, Xiaochen brought Wan Wan and two of her maids. The group quickly arrived at the main square of the Seventh Realm's Black Palace. At this time, there was already a small starship and more than 10 young geniuses of the Seventh Realm waiting for them. Everyone naturally wanted to follow Xiaochen to the Seven Realms continent. Without wasting any time, they directly boarded the starship and slowly flew away from the seventh peak. Perhaps she was tired from playing in the morning, but as soon as they left the Immortal Realm continent, Wan Wan fell asleep. Seeing this, Xiaochen handed Wan Wan over to the two maids. Then he went to find Yu Shujin and asked her about the Seven Realms continent. According to Yu Shujin, other than the Hachibara Senkai, there were many other factions in the First Wilderness. These factions naturally followed the Hachibara Senkai's lead. Although they were not official members of the Hachibara Senkai and could only be considered as vassal forces, many of their ancestors had broken through to the Immortal Realm and joined the Hachibara Senkai after so many years. Therefore, the relationship between the Hachibara Senkai and these major factions could be said to be very close. It was almost to the extent that it was difficult to distinguish one from the other. The First Wilderness was the Hachibara Senkai's true headquarters. It was also the result of countless years of hard work by the Hachibara Senkai. Unlike the other Desolates, none of the living beings in the First Desolate believed in the will of the Heavenly Tao. This was similar to how the living beings in the other Desolates believed that the Eight Desolates' immortal world was a bunch of thieves. In the First Wilderness, the Hachibara Senkai had absolute prestige. The Seven Realms continent was the continent of the Seventh Realm. The sects, families, and other major factions on the continent were all vassals of the Seventh Realm. It was precisely because of this relationship with the Seventh Realm that Yu Shujin suggested that Xiaochen go to the Seven Realms continent. After all, as the heir of the Seventh Realm, Xiaochen did indeed need to represent the Seventh Realm on some occasions. It would be a joke if the heir of the Seventh Realm did not even meet his own people. Of course, this was also Luo Li's intention. In short, Xiaochen's purpose in going to the Seven Realms continent was very simple. He wanted to meet the leaders of the major sects on the Seven Realms continent and get to know them. At the same time, he wanted to officially inform them that Xiaochen had become the heir of the Seventh Realm. After all, Xiaochen had never been to the Seven Realms continent before. After introducing the situation of the Seven Realms continent to Xiaochen, Yu Shujin added, "The Human Emperor sect has also chosen the Seven Realms continent." Back then, many warriors of the Second Wilderness were settled on the continents of the First Wilderness. Chen Bai, the leader of the Human Emperor sect, took the initiative to apply to go to the Seven Realms continent. He also made it clear that the Human Emperor sect was willing to become a vassal sect of the Seventh Realm. Of course, Chen Bai naturally had his reasons for doing so. First of all, he wanted to take root on the first continent. Naturally, the Hachibara Senkai was the best choice. Secondly, Haoyun was now a genius of the Seventh Realm and had successfully entered the Seventh Realm. In this way, among the 8 realms of the Hachibara Senkai, the Human Emperor sect's best choice was naturally the Seventh Realm. The experts of the seventh realm did not refuse Chen Bai's request. After all, the Seven Realms continent was very large. It was not inferior to the seventh continent of the seventh wilderness where Xiaochen had been. Therefore, it was not a problem to arrange a human emperor sect. A few days ago, the human emperor sect had already set off for the Seven Realms continent. Now, they should be choosing the location of their mountain gate. Hearing that the human emperor sect was also in the Seven Realms continent, Xiaochen only nodded slightly and did not say much. They did not encounter any trouble or danger along the way, but this was normal. After all, they were in the first wilderness. Who would be foolish enough to have any ideas about the Hachibara Senkai? They arrived at the Seven Realms continent very smoothly. Looking at the magnificent continent below, Luan was very happy, as if she had found a treasure. Looking at the happy expression of the little girl, Xiaochen also smiled. Then, he turned to Yu Shujin and said, "Where are we going next?" Although he had learned some things about the Seven Realms continent from Yu Shujin was undoubtedly the one who knew more about the Seven Realms continent. Therefore, Xiaochen naturally let Yu Shujin make the arrangements. Hearing Xiaochen's inquiry, Yu Shujin obviously had a plan in mind. She immediately said, "In the Seven Realms continent, there should be 5 great sage sects, including the human emperor sect. Among them, the Taibai sect is the strongest. Why don't we go directly to the Taibai sect?" The Taibai sect was the strongest, stronger than the human emperor sect. Therefore, according to Yu Shujin, the first stop should be the Taibai sect. Hearing Yu Shujin's words, Xiaochen had no objection. He nodded and said, "Okay, let's go to the Taibai sect first." On the surface, Xiaochen's expression did not change, but in his heart, he could not help but sigh. It seemed that the strength of the first wilderness was indeed far superior to the other barons. Begging for a monthly vote, begging for a recommendation. Chapter 1747. Xiaochen sighed inwardly at the strength of the first wilderness. Although this was the first time he came to the first wilderness and he only had a general understanding of the situation, it was not difficult to see that the strength of the first wilderness far exceeded that of the other wastelands. Think about the status of the human emperor sect in the second wilderness. It was the only great sage sect in the human emperor continent. The human emperor continent itself was one of the 7 continents of the second wilderness. In the second wilderness, the human emperor sect was strong enough to dominate the human emperor continent. However, after coming to the first wilderness, its strength was nothing in the Seven Realms continent, let alone dominating the Seven Realms continent. From this, it could be seen that the number of experts in the first wilderness was significantly greater than that of the other wastelands. Of course, this was directly related to the situation in the first desolate land. In the first desolate land, there was no will of the heavenly way. Warriors did not need to experience the so-called heavenly punishment when breaking through. As a result, the success rate of breaking through was naturally higher. At least one thing was certain, and that was that no one would be punished by the heavenly punishment when breaking through. Perhaps it was because of the great strength of the first wilderness that the Hachibara Senkai was able to compete with the other 7 wastelands for so many years. The starship flew above the Seven Realms continent. According to Yu Shujin's arrangement, they soon arrived at the Taibai sect. The Taibai sect was located on a small island in the middle of a lake. The lake was very large. In the eyes of ordinary people, it was no different from the sea. The island in the middle of the lake was very large. There were magnificent jade palaces on the island. Beautiful and fairy-like buildings rose from the ground. Moreover, because it was located in the middle of the lake, it was shrouded in thick fog all year round. As a result, it was like a fairyland. Of course, there was no way to compare it with the 8 peaks where the Hachibara Senkai was located. There was a huge gap between the two. Xiaochen had already seen all kinds of treasured lands. Therefore, for Xiaochen, the Taibai sect in front of him did not arouse any surprise or interest at all. He stood on the deck with an indifferent expression. Yu Shujin and the other 7th Realm's heavens prides clustered around him. As for Luan, she was taken care of by the two maids. The starship slowly landed on the main square. At the same time, there were 36 the great sage of the Tai sect waiting on the main square. As the most powerful great sage sect in the Seven Realms continent, there were 36 the great sage in the Tai sect, which was twice as many as the human emperor sect had. However, at this time, the 36 great saint emperors of Tai sect were all extremely respectful to the starship that was slowly descending from the sky. They did not dare to act presumptuously. Yu Shujin had already sent a message to the Tai sect, so they knew who had come to the Tai sect this time. It was a big shot that the Tai sect couldn't afford to offend. As the starship slowly landed, Xiaochen slowly walked down surrounded by the Seventh Realm's heaven's prides. Of course, he was still holding Luan Luan's hand. In the face of the great sage of the Tai sect, Xiaochen was very calm. However, Luan Luan's bright big eyes looked around curiously. Looking at Xiaochen, a white-haired old man with a sage-like demeanor took the initiative to come in front of Xiaochen. He respectfully saluted Xiaochen and said, "Lu Zonzi greets the heir of the great sage of the Kunlun realm." The old man's name was Lu Zonzi. He was the master of the Tai sect. Xiaochen slightly nodded in response to Lu Zonzi's salute. No need to be so polite. Xiaochen wasn't arrogant. However, even so, Lu Zonzi didn't dare to overstep his bounds in front of Xiaochen. Lu Zonzi didn't know how Xiaochen had become the heir of the Seventh Realm, nor had he heard the rumors about Xiaochen. However, seeing Yu Shujin standing respectfully behind Xiaochen, he knew that Xiaochen hadn't become the heir of the Seventh Realm for no reason. At least, Xiaochen was stronger than Yu Shujin. There was no doubt about that. In the Hachibara Senkai, one couldn't become the heir of a realm just by relying on connections. It wasn't hard to see this from Hong Xiu. As Hong Lian's daughter, Hong Xiu wasn't the heir of the Eighth Realm. The only reason was that her talent wasn't as good as Yi Zhao's. One had to have the talent and combat ability to suppress everything in order to become the heir of a realm. He stood respectfully in front of Xiaochen, followed by the rest of the Tai sect's great saint emperors. After a brief exchange of greetings, Xiaochen slowly walked into the main hall of the Tai sect, accompanied by the crowd. Xiaochen sat in the main seat in the hall. Luan Luan sat beside Xiaochen. Clearly, she couldn't sit still anymore. She looked around in boredom. Sensing the change in Luan Luan, Xiaochen smiled. "What? You can't sit still anymore?" "Yes, this is so boring, father." Hearing this, Luan Luan nodded her head honestly. With Luan Luan's age, she indeed wasn't interested in such occasions. Seeing this, Xiaochen smiled. Then he looked at Lu Zonzi and said, "Sect leader Lu, this is my daughter Xiao Luan. I heard that the Tai sect has great scenery. I wonder if I could trouble you to take her around." Luan Luan was Xiaochen's daughter. She didn't have a surname before, so she naturally followed Xiaochen's surname now. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Lu Zonzi hurriedly stood up and cupped his hands. "You're too polite, heir. I'll arrange it right away." Since Xiao Luan was Xiaochen's daughter, Lu Zonzi naturally didn't dare to neglect her. Moreover, the person responsible for taking care of Luan Luan couldn't be chosen casually. In the end, Lu Zonzi specially asked the female Tai sect member, the Great Sage, to take Xiao Luan to the Tai sect to play. Having the Great Sage accompany someone to play was definitely a first in the Tai sect. However, with Luan Luan's status, she clearly deserved this treatment. Soon, accompanied by the Great Sage and two maids, Luan Luan left the main hall. However, before leaving, Xiaochen still opened his mouth to remind her. "Luan Luan, be obedient. Don't be naughty or daddy will be unhappy." Xiaochen already had some understanding of Luan Luan's character. Although this little girl didn't have the unruly character of those young ladies from big families, she was very clever and very naughty. Therefore, it was necessary to remind her. In the face of Xiaochen's warning, Luan Luan obediently nodded in response. Then, she let Xiaochen hug her and kiss her on the cheek. After that, she got up and skipped away. Looking at Luan Luan's back, Xiaochen smiled knowingly. This little girl only knew how to please him. Of course, Xiaochen also liked Luan Luan's way of doing things. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1748. Xiaochen really doted on Luan Luan. Moreover, with Xiaochen's current status, he could let Luan Luan run amok. However, Xiaochen didn't want Luan Luan to become such a person. Xiaochen had always hated bullying others, being unruly and willful, and bullying the weak. As such, Xiaochen naturally did not want his daughter to become such a person. However, Luan Luan's character made Xiaochen feel at ease. Although she was a little mischievous, Luan Luan didn't bully the weak. Even when facing people weaker than her, Luan Luan would show kindness and help them. This made Xiaochen feel relieved. Seeing how much Xiaochen doted on Luan Luan, Lu Zongzi understood that someone like Luan Luan was probably the second generation with the deepest background in the first wilderness. With an heir apparent as her father, who would dare to offend her in the first wilderness? Lu Zongzi thought to himself. However, he soon recovered and looked at Xiaochen. Heir apparent, I have already informed the sect masters and family heads of the major sects in the Seven Realms continent. I believe they will come soon. Xiaochen had just arrived in the Seven Realms continent. Naturally, he wanted to meet the sect masters and family heads of the major sections. Of course, not everyone was qualified to come. Among the people invited by Lu Zongzi, the weakest had reached the level of a saint sect. However, after hearing Lu Zongzi's words, Xiaochen still felt that it was too troublesome. Xiaochen didn't want to meet the sect masters and family heads of the saint sects and quasi-saint sects alone because it was too troublesome. Therefore, after a moment of silence, Xiaochen said to Lu Zongzi, "Thank you for your trouble. However, I won't be meeting the others alone. Let junior brother Yu Shujin take me to meet them. As for the other people from the four great sage sects, please inform me when they arrive." He only planned to meet with the sect masters of the 5 great sage sects. As for the quasi-sage sects and saint-level sects, Xiaochen gave Yu Shujin full authority to deal with them. After all, there were so many people. If Xiaochen had to meet each of them alone, it would indeed be very troublesome. Therefore, it was a good choice to let Yu Shujin handle it directly. Upon hearing Xiaochen's words, Lu Zongzi and Yu Shujin both stood up and replied. This time, Xiaochen came to the Seven Realms continent to meet the sect masters of the Seven Realms continent. Of course, his main purpose was to meet the 5 great sage sects. Secondly, he wanted to bring Luan Luan out to play. Ever since he had this daughter, Xiaochen hadn't had much time to accompany her. Now that he had this rare opportunity, Xiaochen intended to make up for it. Everyone chatted in the hall. Facing the gentle and approachable Xiaochen, Lu Zongzi and the great sage of Taibai sect gradually relaxed. It could be seen that Xiaochen wasn't an arrogant person. On the contrary, Xiaochen gave Lu Zongzi and the others the impression that he was very restrained and indifferent. He didn't use his power to oppress others. He had always been very gentle when talking to everyone. While Xiaochen and the others were chatting in the hall, Luan Luan was having fun in Taibai's sect with the 2 maids and the female the great sage. It was no wonder that Luan Luan was so excited. This was the first time that she and Xiaochen went on a long journey. Moreover, Taibai's sect was the #1 sect in the Seven Realms continent. The location of the sect was naturally the last treasure land in the Seven Realms continent. The scenery was indeed beautiful. Putting aside the richness of the spiritual energy, Taibai sect was comparable to the 8 peaks where Hachibara Senkai was located. Of course, this was only talking about the scenery. In terms of richness of spiritual energy, the two naturally couldn't be compared. Along the way, they visited several places. Luan Luan and the others came to a plum garden. Looking at the plum blossoms in full bloom, Luan Luan was so happy that she danced with joy. However, at this moment, a person who seemed to be an elder of Taibai's sect found the great sage who had been accompanying Luan Luan and whispered something to her. Immediately, the beautiful face of the great sage changed slightly. She pondered for a moment and said to the elder, "I'll go. You help me look for Miss Xiao." Luan didn't know what had happened, but it should be very serious. Besides, the great sage had to go personally to solve it. The great sage came to Luan and said with an apologetic expression, "Miss Xiao, I suddenly have something to do here. I may have to leave." Luan didn't mind that he had to leave for a while. Before the great sage finished his words, Luan spoke in a childlike manner. "It's fine. I can play by myself." Luan wasn't in the mood to care about these things. Besides, she was only 4 or 5 years old. She obviously wouldn't care about these things. Hearing Luan's words, the great holy emperor smiled apologetically and then bid farewell to the 2 maids beside Luan before leaving the plum blossom forest. Luan wasn't displeased by the great sage's departure. After all, she didn't care about these things at all. Luan continued to play in the plum blossom forest. At the end of the plum blossom forest, she saw the entrance to a cave. Without hesitation, she asked the elder who had stayed behind, "Where's this place?" Upon hearing Luan's question, the elder replied truthfully, "Miss Xiao, this is the Taibai sect's herb garden." This small world was indeed the herb garden of the Taibai sect. It was specially planted with many spiritual herbs and spiritual fruits. Luan's curiosity was piqued when she heard that it was a herb garden. She immediately asked, "Herb garden? Can I go in and play first?" Hearing Luan's words, the elder hesitated. After all, the herb garden was considered a forbidden area in the white sect. Not just anyone could enter. However, after a moment of hesitation, the elder nodded. "All right. Miss Xiao, please wait for a moment. I will open the entrance." He didn't refuse Luan because the great sage had said that he only needed to comply with Luan's requests. He couldn't refuse any of Luan's requests. Moreover, although this herb garden was precious, it wasn't much. After all, there were only some ordinary spiritual herbs and spiritual fruits planted inside. As for the true treasures, they couldn't be artificially grown. Therefore, since Luan wanted to enter and play, it wasn't a big deal. After hearing the elder's words, Luan imitated the usual Xiao Chen. She cupped her hands and said, "If that's the case, then many thanks." Seeing Luan deliberately imitating an adult, the elder felt a warmth in his heart. He couldn't help it. Luan's appearance was really too lovable. He didn't say anything else and used his identity token to open the restriction on the herb garden's entrance. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. Chapter 1749. After fulfilling Luan's request, the barrier around the herb garden was opened. Luan happily ran into the herb garden. She passed through the entrance and soon arrived at the small world where the herb garden was located. As soon as she entered the herb garden, she smelled a rich fragrance. It was the fragrance of many spirit herbs and spirit fruits. The white sect's herb garden was very large and there were many spirit herbs and spirit fruits. Of course, most of them were low-grade spirit herbs and spirit fruits. This was the first time Luan was faced with so many spirit fruits and spirit herbs. She unconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva and muttered with a pout, "It smells so good." Luan didn't know why, but she felt that the fragrance of these spirit herbs and spirit fruits was very fragrant. She couldn't stop her saliva from flowing out. Following behind Luan, the white sect's deacon looked at the longing expression on Luan's face. Then, he smiled and said, "There are many ripe spirit fruits in this herb garden. The taste is very good." Speaking of the white sect's herb garden, the elder's face revealed a proud smile. Indeed, the white sect's herb garden was undoubtedly the best in the entire Seven Realms continent. Unfortunately, Luan wasn't stunned because of her surprise. As soon as the elder's voice fell, Luan turned her head and looked at him with an adorable expression. "That? Can we try the spirit fruits here?" In the face of the fragrance that was emitted from the medicinal garden, Luan's appetite was indeed aroused. When he heard this, the elder readily agreed and immediately nodded his head. Of course. Remembering the great sage's instructions, the elder didn't refuse Luan's request. Moreover, the spirit fruits in the herb garden contained spirit energy. In his eyes, how much could a child like Luan eat? It should be known that even if a warrior of the celestial realm ate the lowest grade spirit fruits in this herb garden, he could only eat at most 20 at a time. Because if one ate too many spirit fruits in a short period of time and was unable to refine the spirit energy in them in time, their meridians would definitely swell and hurt. Even a celestial realm martial artist could only eat 20 pills at a time, and Luan obviously did not have the cultivation of a celestial realm martial artist. Moreover, she was still so young, and the meridians in her body had not yet fully matured. Under such circumstances, in the elder's opinion, Luan could only eat 3 pills at most. 3 spirit fruits were nothing to the Tai sect, so the elder agreed without hesitation. However, at this time, this elder clearly did not realize that his decision would bring a real disaster to the Tai sect's medicine garden. Luan's eyes flashed with excitement when she heard the elder's words. She subconsciously licked her lips and rushed toward the nearest fruit trees. Looking at Luan's greedy appearance, the elder felt that she was very cute. Under his gaze, Luan quickly climbed up the fruit tree, sat on the branch, and began to eat without caring about her image. She ate 1 spirit fruit at a time. In the blink of an eye, 5 spirit fruits were in Luan's stomach. Seeing Luan eat 5 spirit fruits in the blink of an eye, the elder's smile instantly froze. Just a moment ago, he was full of confidence that a little girl like Luan could only eat 3 or 4 spirit fruits at most. But now, in the blink of an eye, 5 spirit fruits were in Luan's stomach. Moreover, while the elder was in a daze, Luan didn't stop eating. In less than 10 breaths of time, 10 spirit fruits were in Luan's stomach. With a face full of satisfaction, Luan patted her small belly and said, "It's delicious." She really liked the taste of these spirit fruits. After saying that, Luan didn't stop and continued to eat. Seeing Luan devouring the spirit fruits like a locust swarm, the elder came back to his senses. He looked at Luan and said, "Slow down. You can't eat too much. You won't be able to refine the spirit energy and it will easily damage your meridians." These spirit fruits weren't ordinary fruits. Under normal circumstances, every time a spirit fruit was eaten, one had to sit cross-legged and refine it. After completely refining the spirit energy in the spirit fruit, one could only continue eating it. Who was like Luan, who simply swallowed them whole? Not to mention refining them, she was simply swallowing them whole. He was afraid that something bad would happen to Luan. However, Luan didn't seem to care about the elder's words at all. She continued to eat and drink as she pleased. Seeing that Luan didn't listen to his advice, the elder was worried and immediately prepared to stop Luan. Unfortunately, even with his cultivation of the sage realm, he couldn't catch Luan. Luan didn't seem to be suppressed by his cultivation at all. She nimbly dodged his restraint with a leap. Celestial realm. Seeing that Luan easily dodged his claw, the elder frowned and said. Previously, he did not deliberately sense Luan's cultivation level. He just thought that a 4 or 5-year-old child could not have a high cultivation level. But now, the cultivation level that Luan displayed was obviously at the level of the celestial realm. A 4 or 5-year-old child actually had the cultivation level of the celestial realm. This shocked the elder. However, if he knew that Luan had the cultivation level of the celestial realm, and this was the result of only cultivating for an hour every day, then her cultivation level would definitely be higher than this. But the shock of cultivation was nothing to the elder. What really surprised him was that Luan was actually able to dodge his restraint with her cultivation of the celestial realm. This was simply too inconceivable. One must know that he had the cultivation of the sage realm. The gap between the sage realm and the celestial realm couldn't even be described as the gap between the heaven and the earth. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that a Celestial Realm warrior in front of a Sage Realm warrior probably didn't even need the Sage Realm warrior to make a move. The Sage Realm warrior's aura alone was enough to make a Celestial Realm warrior explode and die, let alone dodge the restraint of a Sage Realm warrior. After successfully dodging the Elder's restraint, Wan's eyes flashed with a touch of displeasure. "What are you doing?" Obviously, Wan was very dissatisfied with the Elder's action. Hearing her words, the Elder came back to his senses and smiled with a complicated expression. Those are spirit fruits. It's not good to eat too much. Humph, I think you're just unwilling to part with them. Stingy guy. You clearly promised to give them to me, but now you're going back on your word. Humph, I'll just ask my father to compensate you for how much I eat. Wan coldly snorted and said. Please collect, please vote, please recommend me. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.